Section 1 of Mark Twain's Travel Letters from 1891 to 1892. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mark Twain at Aix-les-Bains, from the November 8, 1891 Chicago Daily Tribune. Certainly Aix-les-Bains is an enchanting place. It is a strong word, but I think the facts justify it. True, there is a rabble of nobilities, big and little, here all the time, and often a king or two, but as those behave quite nicely and also keep mainly to themselves, they are little or no annoyance. And then a king makes the best advertisement there is, and the cheapest. All he costs is a reception at the station by the mayor and the police in their Sunday uniforms, shop front decorations along the route from station to hotel, brass band at the hotel, fireworks in the evening, free bath in the morning. This is the whole expense, and in return for it he goes away from here with the broad of his back metaphorically stenciled over with display ads, which shout to all the nations of the earth, assisted by the telegraph: Rheumatism routed at Aix-les-Bains, gout admonished, nerves braced up, all diseases welcomed and satisfaction given, or the money refunded at the door. We leave nature's noble cliffs and crags undefiled and uninsulted by the advertiser's paintbrush. We use the back of a king, which is better and properer and more effective, too, for the cliff stays still and few see it, but the king moves across the fields of the world and is visible from all points like a constellation. We are out of kings this week, but one will be along soon, possibly His Satanic Majesty of Russia. There's a colossus for you, a mysterious and terrible form that towers up into unsearchable space and casts a shadow across the universe like a planet in eclipse. There will be but one absorbing spectacle in this world when we stencil him and start him out. This is an old valley, this of Aix, both in the history of man and the geological records of its rocks. Its little Lake of Bourget carries the human history back to the lake dwellers, furnishing 7 groups of their habitations, and Dr. William Wakefield says in his interesting local guidebook that the mountains round about furnish, geologically, a veritable epitome of the globe. The stratified chapters of the earth's history are clearly and permanently written on the sides of the roaring bulk of the Dent du Chat, but many of the layers of race, religion, and government, which in turn have flourished and perished here between the lake dweller of several thousand years ago and the French Republican of today, are ill-defined and uninforming by comparison. There were several varieties of pagans. They went their way, one after the other, down into night and oblivion, leaving no account of themselves, no memorials. The Romans arrived 2,300 years ago. Other parts of France are rich with remembrances of their 8 centuries of occupation, but not many are here. Other pagans followed the Romans. By and by, Christianity arrived, some 400 years after the time of Christ. The long procession of races, languages, religions, and dynasties demolished each other's monuments and obliterated each other's records. It is man's way always. As a result, nothing is left of the handiwork of the remoter inhabitants of the region, except the constructions of the lake dwellers and some Roman odds and ends. There is a part of a small Roman temple. There is a part of a Roman bath. There is a graceful and battered Roman arch. It stands on a turfy level over the way from the present great bathhouse, is surrounded by magnolia trees, and is both a picturesque and suggestive object. It has stood there some 1,000 years. Its nearest neighbor, not 20 steps away, is a Catholic church. They are symbols of the two chief eras in the history of Aix. Yes, and of her European world. I judge that the venerable arch is held in reverent esteem by everybody, and that this esteem is its sufficient protection from insult, for it is the only public structure I have yet seen in France which lacks the sign, "It is forbidden to post bills here." Its neighbor, the church, has that sign on more than one of its sides, and other signs too, forbidding certain other sorts of desecration. The arch's next nearest neighbor, just at its elbow, like the church, is the telegraph office. So there you have the three great eras bunched together: the era of war, the era of theology, the era of business. You pass under the arch, and the buried Caesars seem to rise from the dust of the centuries and flit before you. You pass by that old battered church, and are in touch with the Middle Ages. And with another step you can put down 10 francs and shake hands with Oshkosh under the Atlantic. It is curious to think what changes the last of the three symbols stands for: changes in men's ways and thoughts, changes in material civilization, changes in the deity, or in men's conception of the deity, if that is an exacter way of putting it. The second of the symbols arrived in the earth at a time when the deity's possession consisted of a small sky freckled with mustard-seed stars, and under it a patch of landed estate, not so big as the holdings of the Czar today, and all his time was taken up trying to keep a handful of Jews in some sort of order, exactly the same number of them that the Czar has lately been dealing with in a more abrupt and far less loving and long-suffering way. At a later time, a time within all old men's memories, the deity was otherwise engaged. He was dreaming his eternities away on his great white throne, steeped in the soft bliss of hymns of praise wafted aloft without ceasing from choirs of ransomed souls, Presbyterians, and the rest. This was a deity proper enough to the size and condition of things, no doubt a provincial deity with provincial tastes. The change since has been inconceivably vast. His empire has been unimaginably enlarged. Today he is master of a universe made up of myriads upon myriads of gigantic suns, and among them, lost in that limitless sea of light, floats that atom, his earth, which once seemed so good and satisfactory and cost so many days of patient labor to build, a mere cork adrift in the waters of a shoreless Atlantic. This is the business era, and no doubt he is governing his huge empire now, not by dreaming his time away in the buzz of hymning choirs, with occasional explosions of arbitrary power disproportioned to the size of the annoyance, but by applying laws of a sort proper and necessary to the sane and successful management of a complex and prodigious establishment, and by seeing to it that the exact and constant operation of these laws is not interfered with for the accommodation of any individual or political or religious faction or nation. Mighty has been the advance of the nations and the liberalization of thought. A result of it is a changed deity, a deity of a dignity and sublimity proportioned to the majesty of his office and the magnitude of his empire, a deity who has been freed from 100 fretting chains, and will in time be freed from the rest by the several ecclesiastical bodies who have those matters in charge. It was without doubt a mistake and a step backward when the Presbyterian synods of America lately decided by vote to leave him still embarrassed with the dogma of infant damnation. Situated as we are, we cannot at present know with how much of anxiety he watched the balloting, nor with how much of grieved disappointment he observed the result. Well, all these errors above spoken of are modern. They are of last week. They are of yesterday. They are of this morning, so to speak. The springs, the healing waters that gush up from under this hillside village, indeed are ancient. They indeed are a genuine antiquity. They antedate all those fresh human matters by processions of centuries. They were born with the fossils of the dents du chat, and they have been always limpid and always abundant. They furnished 1,000,000 gallons a day to wash the lake dwellers with, the same to wash the Caesars with, no less to wash the Balzac with, and have not diminished on my account. 1,000,000 gallons a day, for how many days? Figures cannot set forth the number. The delivery in the aggregate has amounted to an Atlantic, and there is still an Atlantic down in there. By Dr. Wakefield's calculation, that Atlantic is 3/4 of a mile down in the earth. The calculation is based upon the temperature of the water, which is 114 degrees to 117 degrees Fahrenheit, the natural law being that below a certain depth heat augments at the rate of 1 degree for every 60 feet of descent. Aix is handsome, and handsomely situated, too, on its hill slope, with its stately prospect of mountain range and plain spread out before it and about it. The streets are mainly narrow and steep and crooked and interesting, and offer considerable variety in the way of names. On the corner of one of them you read this: Rue du Puy d'Enfer, Pit of Hell Street. Some of these sidewalks are only 18 inches wide. They are for the cats, probably. There is a pleasant park, and there are spacious and beautiful grounds connected with the two great pleasure resorts, the Cercle and the Villa des Fleurs. The town consists of big hotels, little hotels, and pensions. The season lasts about 6 months, beginning with May. When it is at its height, there are thousands of visitors here, and in the course of the season as many as 20,000 in the aggregate come and go. These are not all here for the baths. Some come for the gambling facilities, and some for the climate. It is a climate where the field strawberry flourishes through the spring, summer, and fall. It is hot in the summer, and hot in earnest, but this is only in the daytime. It is not hot at night. The English season is May and June. They get a good deal of rain then, and they like that. The Americans take July, and the French take August. By the 1st of July, The open-air music and the evening concerts and operas and plays are fairly under way, and from that time onward the rush of pleasure has a steadily increasing boom. It is said that in August the great grounds and the gambling rooms are crowded all the time, and no end of ostensible fun going on. It is a good place for rest and sleep, and general recuperation of forces. The book of Dr. Wakefield says there is something about this atmosphere which is the deadly enemy of insomnia, and I think this must be true, for, if I am any judge, this town is at times the noisiest one in Europe, and yet a body gets more sleep here than he could at home. I don't care where his home is. Now we are living at a most comfortable and satisfactory pension, with a garden of shade trees and flowers and shrubs, and a convincing air of quiet and repose. But just across the little narrow street is the little market square, and at a corner of that is that church that is neighbor to the Roman arch, and that narrow street, and that billiard table of a market-place, and that church are able, on a bet, to turn out more noise to the cubic yard at the wrong time than any other similar combination in the earth or out of it. In the street you have the skull-bursting thunder of the passing hack, a volume of sound not producible by 6 hacks anywhere else. On the hack is a lunatic with a whip, which he cracks to notify the public to get out of his way. This crack is as keen and sharp and penetrating and ear-splitting as a pistol shot at close range, and the lunatic delivers it in volleys, not single shots. You think you will not be able to live till he gets by, and when he does get by he only leaves a vacancy for the bandit who sells Le Petit Journal to fill with his strange and awful yell. He arrives with the early morning and the market people, and there is a dog that arrives at about the same time and barks steadily at nothing till he dies, and they fetch another dog just like him. The bark of this breed is the twin of the whip volley, and stabs like a knife. By and by what is left of you the church bell gets. There are many bells, and apparently 6,000 or 7,000 town clocks, and as they are all 5 minutes apart, probably by law, there are no intervals. Some of them are striking all the time, at least after you go to bed they are. There is one clock that strikes the hour, and then strikes it over again to see if it was right. Then for evenings and Sundays there is a chime that starts in pleasantly and musically, then suddenly breaks into a frantic roar and boom and crash of warring sounds that make you think Paris is up and the revolution come again. And yet, as I have said, one sleeps here, sleeps like the dead. Once he gets his grip on his sleep, neither hack, nor whip, nor news fiend, nor dog, nor bell cyclone, nor all of them together, can wrench it loose or mar its deep and tranquil continuity. Yes, there is indeed something in this air that is death to insomnia. The buildings of the Cercle and the Villa des Fleurs are huge in size, and each has a theater in it and a great restaurant, also conveniences for gambling and general and variegated entertainment. They stand in ornamental grounds of great extent and beauty. The multitudes of fashionable folk sit at refreshment tables in the open air afternoons, and listen to the music, and it is there that they mainly go to break the Sabbath. To get the privilege of entering these grounds and buildings, you buy a ticket for a few francs, which is good for the whole season. You are then free to go and come at all hours, attend the plays and concerts free, except on special occasions, gamble, buy refreshments, and make yourself symmetrically comfortable. Nothing could be handier than those two little theaters. The curtain doesn't rise until 8:30. Then, between the acts, one can idle for half an hour in the other departments of the building, damaging his appetite in the restaurants or his pocket in the baccarat room. The singers and actors are from Paris, and their performance is beyond praise. I was never in a fashionable gambling hall until I came here. I had read several millions of descriptions of such places, but the reality was new to me. I very much wanted to see this animal, especially the now historic game of baccarat, and this was a good place, for Aix ranks next to Monte Carlo for high play and plenty of it. But the result was what I might have expected. The interest of the looker-on perishes with the novelty of the spectacle, that is to say, in a few minutes. A permanent and intense interest is acquirable in baccarat or in any other game, but you have to buy it. You don't get it by standing around looking on. The baccarat table is covered with green cloth, and is marked off in divisions with chalk or something. The banker sits in the middle, the croupier opposite. The customers fill all the chairs at the table, and the rest of the crowd are massed at their backs and leaning over them to deposit chips or gold coins. Constantly money and chips are flung upon the table, and the game seems to consist of the croupiers reaching for those things with a flexible sculling oar and raking them home. It appeared to be a rational enough game for him, and if I could have borrowed his oar I would have stayed, but I didn't see where the entertainment of the others came in. This was because I saw without perceiving and observed without understanding. For the widow and the orphan and the others do win money there. Once an old gray mother in Israel or elsewhere pulled out, and I heard her say to her daughter or her granddaughter as they passed me, "There, I've won 6 louis, and I'm going to quit while I'm ahead." Also there was this statistic. A friend pointed to a young man with a dead stub of a cigar in his mouth, which he kept munching nervously all the time, and pitching $100 chips on the board, while two sweet young girls reached down over his shoulders to deposit modest little gold pieces, and said, "He's only funning now, wanting a few hundred to pass the time, waiting for the gold room to open, you know, which won't be till well after midnight. Then you'll see him bet. He won £14,000 there last night. They don't bet anything there but big money." The thing I chiefly missed was the haggard people with the intense eye, the hunted look, the desperate mien, candidates for suicide and the pauper's grave. They are in the descriptions as a rule, but they were off duty that night. All the gamblers, male and female, old and young, looked abnormally cheerful and prosperous. However, all the nations were there, clothed richly and speaking all the languages. Some of the women were painted and were evidently shaky as to character. These items tallied with the descriptions well enough. The etiquette of the place was difficult to master. In the brilliant and populous halls and corridors you don't smoke, and you wear your hat, no matter how many ladies are in the thick throng of drifting humanity. But the moment you cross the sacred threshold and enter the gambling hall, off the hat must come, and everybody lights his cigar and goes to suffocating the ladies. But what I came here for, 5 weeks ago, was the baths. My right arm was disabled with rheumatism. To sit at home in America and guess out the European bath best fitted for a particular ailment or combination of ailments, it is not possible, and it would not be a good idea to experiment in that way anyhow. There are a great many curative baths on the continent, and some are good for one disease but bad for another. So it is necessary to let a physician name your bath for you. As a rule, Americans go to London to get this advice, and South Americans go to Paris for it. Now and then an economist chooses his bath himself, and does 1,000 miles of railroading to get to it, and then the local physicians tell him he has come to the wrong place. He sees that he has lost time and money and strength, and almost the minute that he realizes this, he loses his temper. I had the rheumatism, and was advised to go to Aix, not so much because I had that disease as because I had the promise of certain others. What they were was not explained to me, but they are either in the following menu or I have been sent to the wrong place. Dr. Wakefield's book says, "We know that the class of maladies benefited by the water and baths at Aix are those due to defect of nutrition, debility of the nervous system, or to a gouty, rheumatic, herpetic, or scrofulous diathesis, all diseases extremely debilitating and requiring a tonic and not a depressing action of the remedy. This it seems to find here, as recorded experience and daily action can testify. According to the line of treatment, followed particularly with due regard to the temperature, the action of the Aix waters can be made sedative, exciting, derivative, or alternative and tonic." The establishment is the property of France, and all the officers and servants are employees of the French government. The bath-house is a huge and massive pile of white marble masonry, and looks more like a temple than anything else. It has several floors, and each is full of bath cabarets. There is every kind of bath, for the nose, the ears, the throat, vapor baths, tube baths, swimming baths, and all people's favorite, the douche. It is a good building to get lost in when you are not familiar with it. From early morning until nearly noon, people are streaming in and streaming out without halt. The majority come afoot, but great numbers are brought in sedan chairs, a sufficiently ugly contrivance whose cover is a steep little tent made of striped canvas. You see nothing of the patient in this diving bell as the bearers tramp along, except a glimpse of his ankles bound together and swathed around with blankets or towels to that generous degree that the result suggests a sore piano leg. By attention and practice the pall-bearers have got so that they can keep out of step all the time, and they do it. As a consequence, their veiled churn goes rocking, tilting, swaying along like a bell buoy in a ground swell. It makes the oldest sailor seasick to look at that spectacle. The course is usually 15 douche baths and 5 tub baths. You take the douche 3 days in succession, then knock off and take a tub. You keep up this distribution through the course. If one course does not cure you, you take another one after an interval. You seek a local physician, and he examines your case and prescribes the kind of bath required for it, with various other particulars. Then you buy your course tickets and pay for them in advance, $9. With the tickets you get a memorandum book with your dates and hours all set down in it. The doctor takes you into the bath the first morning and gives some instructions to the 2 douchers who are to handle you through the course. The pourboires are about 10 cents to each of the men for each bath, payable at the end of the course. Also, at the end of the course, you pay 3 or 4 francs to the superintendent of your department of the bath-house. These are useful particulars to know, and are not to be found in the books. A servant of your hotel carries your towels and sheet to the bath daily, and brings them away again. They are the property of the hotel. The French government doesn't furnish these things. You meet all kinds of people at a place like this, and if you give them a chance they will submerge you under their experiences, for they are either glad or sorry they came, and they want to spread their feelings out and enjoy them. One of them said to me, "It's great, these baths. I didn't come here for my health. I only came to find out if there was anything the matter with me. The doctor told me if there was, the symptoms would soon appear. After the first douche I had sharp pains in all my muscles. The doctor said it was different varieties of rheumatism, and the best varieties there were, too. After my second bath I had aches in my bones and skull and around. The doctor said it was different varieties of neuralgia, and the best in the market. Anybody would tell me so. I got many new kinds of pains out of my third douche. These were in my joints. The doctor said it was gout, complicated with heart disease, and encouraged me to go on. Then we had the fourth douche, and I came out on a stretcher that time and fetched with me one vast, diversified, undulating, continental kind of pain, with horizons to it, and zones and parallels of latitude and meridians of longitude, and isothermal belts and variations of the compass. Oh, everything tidy and right up to the latest developments, you know. The doctor said it was inflammation of the soul, and just the very thing. Well, I went right on gathering them in. Toothache, liver complaint, softening of the brain, nostalgia, bronchitis, osteology, fits, coleoptera, hydrangea, Cyclopedia Britannica, delirium tremens, and a lot of other things that I've got down in my list that I'll show you, and you can keep it if you like, and tally off the bric-a-brac as you lay it in. The doctor said I was a grand proof of what these baths could do. Said I had come here as innocent of diseases as a grindstone, and inside of 3 weeks these baths had sluiced out of me every important ailment known to medical science, along with considerable more that were entirely new and patentable. Why, he wanted to exhibit me in his bay window. There seems to be a good many liars this year. I began to take the baths and found them most enjoyable, so enjoyable that if I hadn't had a disease I would have borrowed one just to have a pretext for going on. They took me into a stone-floored basin about 14 feet square, which had enough strange-looking pipes and things in it to make it look like a torture chamber. The two half-naked men seated me on a pine stool and kept a couple of warm-water jets as thick as one's wrist playing upon me while they kneaded me, stroked me, twisted me, and applied all the other details of the scientific massage to me for 7 or 8 minutes. Then they stood me up and played a powerful jet upon me all around for another minute. The cool shower bath came next, and the thing was over. I came out of the bathhouse a few minutes later feeling younger and fresher and finer than I have felt since I was a boy. The spring and cheer and delight of this exaltation lasted 3 hours, and the same uplifting effect has followed the 20 douches which I have taken since. After my first douche, I went to the chemist's on the corner, as per instructions, and asked for half a glass of Schall water. It comes from a spring 16 miles from here. It was furnished to me, but perceiving that there was something the matter with it, I offered to wait till they could get some that was fresh, but they said it always smelt that way. They said that the reason that this was so much ranker than the sulphur water of the bath was that this contained 32 times as much sulphur as that. It may be true, but in my opinion that water comes from a cemetery, and not a fresh cemetery either. History says that one of the early Roman generals lost an army down there somewhere. If he could come back now, I think this water would help him find it again. However, I drank the Schal, and have drunk it once or twice every day since. I suppose it is all right, but I wish I knew what was the matter with those Romans. My first baths developed plenty of pain, but the subsequent ones removed almost all of it. I have got back the use of my arm these last few days, and I am going away now. There are many beautiful drives about Aix, many interesting places to visit, and much pleasure to be found in paddling around the little Lake Bourget on the small steamers, but the excursion which satisfied me best was a trip to Annecy and its neighborhood. You go to Annecy in an hour by rail, through a garden land that has not had its equal for beauty perhaps since Eden, and certainly Eden was not cultivated as this garden is. The charm and loveliness of the whole region are bewildering. Picturesque rocks, forest-clothed hills, slopes richly bright in the cleanest and greenest grass, fields of grain without fleck or flaw, dainty of color, and as shiny and shimmery as silk, old gray mansions and towers, half buried in foliage, and sunny eminences, deep chasms with precipitous walls, and a swift stream of pale blue water between, with now and then a tumbling cascade, and always noble mountains in view, with vagrant white clouds curling about their summits. Then, at the end of an hour, you come to Annecy and rattle through its old crooked lanes, built solidly up with curious old houses that are a dream of the Middle Ages, and presently you come to the main object of your trip, Lake Annecy. It is a revelation. It is a miracle. It brings the tears to a body's eyes, it is so enchanting. That is to say, it affects you just as all things that you instantly recognize as perfect affect you. Perfect music, perfect eloquence, perfect art, perfect joy, perfect grief. It stretches itself out there in the caressing sunlight, and away towards its border of majestic mountains, a crisped and radiant plain of water of the divinest blue that can be imagined. All the blues are there, from the faintest shoal-water suggestion of the color, detectable only in the shadow of some overhanging object, all the way through a little blue and a little bluer still, and again a shade bluer, till you strike the deep, rich Mediterranean splendor which breaks the heart in your bosom, it is so beautiful. And the mountains, as you skim along on the steamboat, how stately their forms, how noble their proportions, how green their velvet slopes, how soft the mottlings of sun and shadow that play about the rocky ramparts that crown them, how opaline the vast upheavals of snow banked against the sky in the remotenesses beyond, Mont Blanc and the others. How shall anybody describe? Why, not even the painter can quite do it, and the most the pen can do is to suggest. Up the lake there is an old abbey, Talloires, relic of the Middle Ages. We stopped there, stepped from the sparkling water and the rush and boom and fret and fever of the 19th century into the solemnity and the silence and the soft gloom and the brooding mystery of a remote antiquity. The stone step at the water's edge had the traces of a worn-out inscription on it. The wide flight of stone steps that led up to the front door was polished smooth by the passing feet of forgotten centuries, and there was not an unbroken stone among them all. Within the pile was the old square cloister with covered arcade all around it, where the monks of the ancient times used to sit and meditate, and now and then welcome to their hospitalities the wandering knight with his tin breeches on, and in the middle of the square court, open to the sky, was a stone well curb, cracked and slick with age and use, and all about it were weeds, and among the weeds moldy brickbats that the Crusaders used to throw at each other. A passage at the further side of the cloister led to another weedy and roofless little enclosure beyond, where there was a ruined wall closed to the top with masses of ivy, and flanking it was a battered and picturesque arch. All over the building there were comfortable rooms and comfortable beds, and clean plank floors with no carpets on them. In one bedroom upstairs were half a dozen portraits, dimming relics of the vanished centuries, portraits of abbots who used to be as grand as princes in their old day, and very rich, and much worshipped, and very holy. And in the next room there was a howling chromo and an electric bell. Downstairs there was an ancient wood carving with a Latin word commanding silence, and there was a spang new piano close by. Two elderly French women with the kindest and honestest and sincerest faces have the Abbey now, and they board and lodge people who are tired of the roar of cities and want to be where the dead silence and serenity and peace of this old nest will heal their blistered spirits and patch up their ragged minds. They fed us well, they slept us well, and I wish I could have stayed there a few years and got a solid rest. Mark Twain. End of Mark Twain at Aix-les-Bains, read by John Greenman. This is Section 2 of Mark Twain's Travel Letters of 1891 to 1892. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mark Twain at Bayreuth. From the Chicago Sunday Tribune, December 6, 1891. Recorded by John Greenman. It was at Nuremberg that we struck the inundation of music-mad strangers that was rolling down upon Bayreuth. It had been long since we had seen such multitudes of excited and struggling people. It took a good half-hour to pack them and pair them into the train, and it was the longest train we have yet seen in Europe. Nuremberg had been witnessing this sort of experience a couple of times a day for about 2 weeks. It gives one an impressive sense of the magnitude of this biennial pilgrimage, for a pilgrimage is what it is. The devotees come from the very ends of the earth to worship their prophet in his own Kaaba, in his own Mecca. If you are living in New York or San Francisco or Chicago or anywhere else in America, and you conclude by the middle of May that you would like to attend the Bayreuth Opera 2 months and a half later, you must use the cable, and get about it immediately, or you will get no seats, and you must cable for lodgings, too. Then, if you are lucky, you will get seats in the last row and lodgings in the fringe of the town. If you stop to write, you will get nothing. There were plenty of people in Nuremberg when we passed through who had come on pilgrimage without first securing seats and lodgings. They had found neither in Bayreuth. They had walked Bayreuth streets a while in sorrow, then gone to Nuremberg, and found neither beds nor standing room, and had walked those quaint streets all night waiting for the hotels to open and empty their guests into the trains, and so make room for these their defeated brethren and sisters in the faith. They had endured from 30 to 40 hours railroading on the continent of Europe, with all which that implies of worry, fatigue, and financial impoverishment, and all they had got, and all they were to get for it, was handiness and accuracy in kicking themselves, acquired by practice in the back streets of the two towns when other people were in bed, for back they must go over that unspeakable journey with their pious mission unfulfilled. These humiliated outcasts had the frowsy and unbrushed and apologetic look of wet cats, and their eyes were glazed with drowsiness. Their bodies were adroop from crown to sole, and all kind-hearted people refrained from asking them if they had been to Bayreuth, and failed to connect, as knowing they would lie. We reached Bayreuth about mid-afternoon of a rainy Saturday. We were of the wise, and had secured lodgings and opera seats months in advance. I am not a musical critic, and did not come here to write essays about the operas and deliver judgment upon their merits. The little children of Bayreuth could do that with a finer sympathy and a broader intelligence than I. I only care to bring 4 or 5 pilgrims to the operas, pilgrims able to appreciate them and enjoy them. What I might write about the performances, to put in my odd time, would be offered to the public as merely a cat's view of a king, and not of didactic value. Next day, which was Sunday, we left for the Opera House, that is to say, the Wagner Temple, a little after the middle of the afternoon. The great building stands all by itself, grand and lovely, on high ground outside the town. We were warned that if we arrived after 4 o'clock we should be obliged to pay $2.50 apiece by way of fine. We saved that, and it may be remarked here that this is the only opportunity Europe offers of saving money. There was a big crowd in the grounds about the building, and the ladies' dresses took the sun with fine effect. I do not mean to intimate that the ladies were in full dress, for that was not so. The dresses were pretty, but neither sex was in evening dress. The interior of the building is simple, severely so, but there's no occasion for color and decoration, since the people sit in the dark. The auditorium has the shape of a keystone, with a stage at the narrow end. There is an aisle on each side, but no aisle in the body of the house. Each row of seats extends in an unbroken curve from one side of the house to the other. There are 7 entrance doors on each side of the theater, and 4 at the butt end, 18 doors to admit and emit 1,650 persons. The number of the particular door by which you are to enter the house or leave it is printed on your ticket, and you can use no door but that one. Thus crowding and confusion are impossible. Not so many as 100 people use any one door. This is better than having the usual and useless elaborate fireproof arrangements. It is the model theater of the world. It can be emptied while the second hand of a watch makes its circuit. It would be entirely safe, even if it were built of lucifer matches. If your seat is near the center of a row and you come in late, you must work your way along a rank of about 25 ladies and gentlemen to get to it. Yet this causes no trouble, for everybody stands up until the seats are full, and the filling is accomplished in a very few minutes. Then all sit down, and you have a solid mass of 1,500 heads making a steep cellar-door slant from the rear of the house down to the stage. All the lights were turned low, so low that the congregation sat in a deep and solemn gloom. The funereal rustling of dresses and the low buzz of conversation began to die swiftly down, and presently not the ghost of a sound was left. This profound and increasingly impressive stillness continued yet during some time, the best preparation for music, spectacle, or speech conceivable. I should think our show people would have invented or imported that simple and impressive device for securing and solidifying the attention of an audience long ago, instead of which they continue to this day to open a performance against a deadly competition in the form of noise, confusion, and a scattered interest. Finally, Out of darkness and distance and mystery soft, rich notes rose upon the stillness, and from his grave the dead magician began to weave his spells about his disciples and steep their souls in his enchantments. There was something strangely impressive in the fancy which kept intruding itself that the composer was conscious in his grave of what was going on here, and that these divine sounds were the clothing of thoughts which were at this moment passing through his brain, not recognized and familiar ones which had issued from it at some former time. The entire overture, long as it was played to a dark house with the curtain down. It was exquisite. It was delicious. But straightway thereafter, of course, came the singing, and it does seem to me that nothing can make a Wagner opera absolutely perfect and satisfactory to the untutored but to leave out the vocal parts. I wish I could see a Wagner opera done in pantomime once. Then one would have the lovely orchestration unvexed to listen to and bathe his spirit in, and the bewilderingly beautiful scenery to intoxicate his eyes with, and the dumb acting couldn't mar these pleasures, because there isn't often anything in a Wagner opera that one would call by such a violent name as acting. As a rule, all you would see would be a couple of silent people, one of them standing still, the other catching flies. Of course, I do not really mean that he would be catching flies. I only mean that the usual operatic gestures, which consist in reaching first one hand out into the air and then the other, might suggest the sport I speak of if the operator attended strictly to business and uttered no sound. This present opera was Parsifal. Madame Wagner does not permit its representation anywhere but in Beirut. The first act of the three occupied 2 hours, and I enjoyed that in spite of the singing. I trust that I know as well as anybody that singing is one of the most entrancing and bewitching and moving and eloquent of all the vehicles invented by man for the conveying of feeling, but it seems to me that a chief virtue in song is melody, air, tune, rhythm, or what you please to call it, and that when this feature is absent, what remains is a picture with the color left out. I was not able to detect in the vocal parts of Parsifal anything that might with confidence be called rhythm or tune or melody. One person performed at a time, and a long time too, often in a noble and always in a high-priced voice. But he only pulled out long notes, then some short ones, then another long one, then a sharp, quick, peremptory bark or two, and so on and so on. And when he was done you saw that the information which he had conveyed had not compensated for the disturbance. Not always, but pretty often. If two of them would but put in a duet occasionally and blend the voices, but no, they don't do that. The great master, who knew so well to make 100 instruments rejoice in unison and pour out their souls in mingled and melodious tides of delicious sound, deals only in barren solos when he puts in the vocal parts. It may be that he was deep, and only added the singing to his opera for the sake of the contrast it would make with the music. Singing. It does seem the wrong name to apply to it. Strictly described, it is a practicing of difficult and unpleasant intervals mainly. An ignorant person gets tired of listening to gymnastic intervals in the long run, no matter how pleasant they may be. In Parsifal there is a hermit named Gurnemanz, who stands on the stage in the one spot and practices by the hour, while first one and then another character of the cast endures what he can of it and retires to die. During the evening there was an intermission of three-quarters of an hour after the first act, and one an hour long after the second. In both instances the theater was totally emptied. People who had previously engaged tables in the one sole eating house were able to put in their time very satisfactorily. The other 1,000 went hungry. The opera was concluded at 10 in the evening, or a little later. When we reached home we had been gone more than 7 hours. 7 hours at $5 a ticket is almost too much for the money. While browsing about the front yard among the crowd between the acts, I encountered 12 or 15 friends from different parts of America, and those of them who were most familiar with Wagner said that Parsifal seldom pleased at first, but that after one had heard it several times it was almost sure to become the favorite. It seemed impossible, but it was true, for the statement came from people whose word was not to be doubted. And I gathered some further information. On the ground I found part of a German musical magazine, and in it a letter written by Ulich 33 years ago, in which he defends the scorned and abused Wagner against people like me, who found fault with the comprehensive absence of what our kind regards as singing. Ulich says Wagner despised jene plapperude Musik, and therefore runs, trills, and schnörkel are discarded by him. I don't know what a schnörkel is, but now that I know it has been left out of these operas, I never have missed so much in my life. And Ulich further says that Wagner's song is true, that it is simply emphasized intoned speech. That certainly describes it, in Parsifal and in some of the other operas, and if I understand Ulich's elaborate German, he apologizes for the beautiful airs in Tannhauser. Very well. Now that Wagner and I understand each other, perhaps we shall get along better, and I shall stop calling him Wagner on the American plan, and hereafter call him Wagner, as per German custom, for I feel entirely friendly now. The minute we get reconciled to a person, how willing we are to throw aside little needless punctilios and pronounce his name right. Of course, I came home wondering why people should come from all corners of America to hear these operas when we have lately had a season or two of them in New York with these same singers in the several parts, and possibly this same orchestra. I resolved to think that out at all hazards. Tuesday. Yesterday they played the only operatic favorite I have ever had, an opera which has always driven me mad with ignorant delight whenever I have heard it, Tannhauser. I heard it first when I was a youth. I heard it last in the last German season in New York. I was busy yesterday, and I did not intend to go, knowing I should have another Tannhauser opportunity in a few days. But after 5 o'clock I found myself free, and walked out to the opera house, and arrived about the beginning of the second act. My opera ticket admitted me to the grounds in front, past the policeman and the chain, and I thought I would take a rest on a bench for an hour or two and wait for the third act. In a moment or so the first bugles blew, and the multitude began to crumble apart and melt into the theater. I will explain that this bugle call is one of the pretty features here. You see, the theater is empty, and hundreds of the audience are a good way off in the feeding house. The first bugle call is blown about a quarter of an hour before time for the curtain to rise. This company of buglers in uniform march out with military step and send out over the landscape a few bars of the theme of the approaching act, piercing the distances with the gracious notes. Then they march to the other entrance and repeat. Presently they do this over again. Yesterday only about 200 people were still left in the front of the house when the second call was blown. In another half-minute they would have been in the house, but then a thing happened which delayed them. The only solitary thing in this world which could be relied on with certainty to accomplish it I suppose. An imperial princess appeared in the balcony above them. They stopped dead in their tracks, and began to gaze in a stupor of gratitude and satisfaction. The lady presently saw that she must disappear, or the doors would be closed upon these worshippers. So she returned to her box. This daughter-in-law of an emperor was pretty. She had a kind face. She was without airs. She is known to be full of common human sympathies. There are many kinds of princes, but this kind is the most harmful of all, for wherever they go they reconcile people to monarchy and set back the clock of progress. The valuable princes, the desirable princes, are the czars and their sort. By their mere dumb presence in the world they cover with derision every argument that can be invented in favor of royalty by the most ingenious casuist. In his time the husband of this princess was valuable. He led a degraded life. He ended it with his own hand in circumstances and surroundings of a hideous sort, and was buried like a god. In the opera house there is a long loft back of the audience, a kind of open gallery in which princes are displayed. It is sacred to them. It is the holy of holies. As soon as the filling of the house is about complete, the standing multitude turn and fix their eyes upon the princely layout, and gaze mutely and longingly and adoringly and regretfully, like sinners looking into heaven. They become rapt, unconscious, steeped in worship. There is no spectacle anywhere that is more pathetic than this. It is worth crossing many oceans to see. It is somehow not the same gaze that people rivet upon a Victor Hugo, or Niagara, or the bones of the mastodon, or the guillotine of the Revolution, or the Great Pyramid, or distant Vesuvius smoking in the sky, or any man long celebrated to you by his genius and achievements, or thing long celebrated to you by the praises of books and pictures. No, that gaze is only the gaze of intense curiosity, interest, wonder, engaged in drinking delicious deep draughts that taste good all the way down, and appease and satisfy the thirst of a lifetime. Satisfy it. That is the word. Hugo and the mastodon will still have a degree of interest thereafter when encountered, but never anything approaching the ecstasy of that first view. The interest of a prince is different. It may be envy, it may be worship. Doubtless it is a mixture of both, and it does not satisfy its thirst with one view, or even noticeably diminish it. Perhaps the essence of the thing is the value in which men attach to a valuable something which has come by luck, and not been earned. $1 picked up in the road is more satisfaction to you than the 99 which you had to work for, and money won at faro or in stock snuggles into your heart in the same way. A prince picks up grandeur, power, and a permanent holiday, and gratis support by a pure accident, the accident of birth, and he stands always before the grieved eye of poverty and obscurity, a monumental representative of luck. And then, supremest value of all, his is the only high fortune on the earth which is secure. The commercial millionaire may become a beggar. The illustrious statesman can make a vital mistake and be dropped and forgotten. The illustrious general can lose a decisive battle, and with it the consideration of men. But once a prince, always a prince. That is to say, an imitation god, and neither hard fortune, nor an infamous character, nor an addled brain, nor the speech of an ass, can undeify him. By common consent of all the nations and all the ages, the most valuable thing in this world is the homage of men, whether deserved or undeserved. It follows without doubt or question, then, that the most desirable position possible is that of a prince. And I think it also follows that the so-called usurpations with which history is littered are the most excusable misdemeanors which men have committed. To usurp a usurpation, that is all it amounts to, isn't it? A prince is not to us what he is to a European, of course. We have not been taught to regard him as a god, and so one good look at him is likely to so nearly appease our curiosity as to make him an object of no great interest next time. We want a fresh one. But it is not so with the European, I am quite sure of it. The same old one will answer, he never stales. 18 years ago I was in London, and I called at an Englishman's house on a bleak and foggy and dismal December afternoon to visit his wife and married daughter by appointment. I waited half an hour, and then they arrived, frozen. They explained that they had been delayed by an unlooked-for circumstance. While passing in the neighborhood of Marlborough House, they saw a crowd gathering, and were told that the Prince of Wales was about to drive out. So they stopped to get a sight of him. They had waited a half hour on the sidewalk, freezing with the crowd, but were disappointed at last. The prince had changed his mind. I said, with a good deal of surprise, "Is it possible that you two have lived in London all your lives and have never seen the Prince of Wales?" Apparently it was their turn to be surprised, for they exclaimed, "What an idea! Why, we have seen him hundreds of times." They had seen him hundreds of times, yet they had waited half an hour in the gloom and the bitter cold, in the midst of a jam of patients from the same asylum, on the chance of seeing him again. It was a stupefying statement, but one is obliged to believe the English even when they say a thing like that. I fumbled around for a remark, and got out this one. "I can't understand it at all. If I had never seen General Grant, I doubt if I would do that even to get a sight of him," with a slight emphasis on the last word. Their blank faces showed that they wondered where the parallel came in. Then they said blandly, "Of course not. He is only a president." It is doubtless a fact that a prince is a permanent interest, an interest not subject to deterioration. The general who was never defeated, the general who never held a council of war, the only general who ever commanded a connected battle-front 1,200 miles long, the smith who welded together the broken parts of a great republic and re-established it where it is quite likely to outlast all the monarchies present and to come, was really a person of no serious consequence to these people. To them, with their training, my general was only a man after all, while their prince was clearly much more than that, a being of a wholly unsimilar construction and constitution, a being of no more blood and kinship with men than are the serene eternal lights of the firmament with the poor dull tallow candles of commerce that sputter and die, and leave nothing behind but a pinch of ashes and a stink. I saw the last act of Tannhauser. I sat in the gloom and the deep stillness, waiting 1 minute, 2 minutes, I do not know exactly how long. Then the soft music of the hidden orchestra began to breathe its rich, long sighs out from under the distant stage, and by the drop curtain parted in the middle and was drawn slowly aside, disclosing a twilighted wood and a wayside shrine, with a white-robed girl praying and a man standing near. Presently that noble chorus of men's voices was heard approaching, and from that moment until the closing of the curtain it was music, just music, music to make one drunk with pleasure, music to make one take scrip and staff and beg his way round the globe to hear it. To such as are intending to come here in the Wagner season next year I wish to say, bring your dinner pail with you. If you do, you will never cease to be thankful. If you do not, you will find it a hard fight to save yourself from famishing in Bayreuth. Bayreuth is merely a large village, and has no very large hotels or eating houses. The principal inns are the Golden Anchor and the Sun. At either of these places you can get an excellent meal. No, I mean you can go there and see other people get it. There is no charge for this. The town is littered with restaurants, but they are all small and bad, and they are overdriven with custom. You must secure a table hours beforehand, and often when you arrive you will find somebody occupying it. We have had this experience. We have had a daily scramble for life, and when I say we, I include shoals of people. I have the impression that the only people who do not have to scramble are the veterans, the disciples who have been here before and know the ropes. I think they arrive about a week before the first opera and engage all the tables for the season. My tribe have tried all kinds of places, some outside of the town, a mile or two, and have captured only nibblings and odds and ends, never in any instance a complete and satisfying meal. Digestible? No, the reverse. These odds and ends are going to serve as souvenirs of Bayreuth, and in that regard their value is not to be overestimated. Photographs fade, bric-a-brac gets lost, busts of Wagner get broken, but once you absorb a Bayreuth restaurant meal, it is your possession and your property until the time comes to embalm the rest of you. Some of these pilgrims here become, in effect, cabinets of souvenirs of Bayreuth. It is believed among scientists that you could examine the crop of a dead Bayreuth pilgrim anywhere in the earth and tell where he came from. But I like this ballast. I think a hermitage scrape-up at 8 in the evening, when all the famine breeders have been there and laid in their mementos and gone, is the quietest thing you can lay on your keelson except gravel. Thursday. They keep 2 teams of singers in stock for the chief roles, and one of these is composed of the most renowned artists in the world, with Materna and Alvari in the lead. I suppose a double team is necessary. Doubtless a single team would die of exhaustion in a week, for all the plays last from 4 in the afternoon until 10 at night. Nearly all the labor falls upon the half-dozen head singers, and apparently they are required to furnish all the noise they can for the money. If they feel a soft, whispery, mysterious feeling, they are required to open up and let the public know it. Operas are given only on Sundays, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, with 3 days of ostensible rest per week, and 2 teams to do the 4 operas. But the ostensible rest is devoted largely to rehearsing. It is said that the off days are devoted to rehearsing from some time in the morning till 10 at night. Are there 2 orchestras also? It is quite likely, since there are 110 names in the orchestra list. Yesterday the opera was Tristan and Isolde. I have seen all sorts of audiences at theaters, operas, concerts, lectures, sermons, funerals, but none which was twin to the Wagner audience at Bayreuth, for fixed and reverential attention, absolute stillness, and petrified retention to the end of an act of the attitude assumed at the beginning of it. You detect no movement in the solid mass of heads and shoulders. You seem to sit with the dead in the gloom of a tomb. You know that they are being stirred to their profoundest depths, that there are times when they want to rise and wave handkerchiefs and shout their approbation, and times when tears are running down their faces, and it would be a relief to free their pent emotions in sobs or screams. Yet you hear not one utterance till the curtain swings together and the closing strains have slowly faded out and died. Then the dead rise with one impulse and shake the building with their applause. every seat is full in the first act, there is not a vacant one in the last. If a man would like to be conspicuous, let him come here and retire from the opera house in the midst of an act. It would make him celebrated. This audience reminds me of nothing I have ever seen and of nothing I have read about, except the city in the Arabian tale where all the inhabitants have been turned to brass, and the traveler finds them after centuries mute, motionless, and still retaining the attitudes which they last knew in life. Here the Wagner audience dress as they please, and sit in the dark and worship in silence. At the Metropolitan in New York they sit in a glare, they wear their showiest harness, they hum airs, they squeak fans, they titter, and they gabble all the time. In some of the boxes the conversation and laughter are so loud as to divide the attention of the house with the stage. In large measure the Metropolitan is a showcase for rich fashionables who are not trained in Wagnerian music and have no reverence for it, but who like to promote art and show their clothes. Can that be an agreeable atmosphere to persons in whom this music produces a sort of divine ecstasy, and to whom its creator is a very deity, his stage a temple, the works of his brain and hands consecrated things, and the partaking of them with eye and ear a sacred solemnity? Manifestly, no. Then perhaps the temporary expatriation, the tedious traversing of seas and continents, the pilgrimage to Bayreuth stand explained. These devotees would worship in an atmosphere of devotion. It is only here that they can find it without fleck or blemish or any worldly pollution. In this remote village there are no sights to see. There is no newspaper to intrude the worries of the distant world. There is nothing going on. It is always Sunday. The pilgrim wends to his temple out of town, sits out his moving service, returns to his bed with his heart and his soul and his body exhausted by long hours of tremendous emotion, and he is in no fit condition to do anything but be torpid and slowly gather back life and strength for the next service. This opera of Tristan and Isolde last night broke the hearts of all witnesses who were of the faith, and I know of some, and have heard of many, who could not sleep after it, but cried the night away. I feel strongly out of place here. Sometimes I feel like the one sane person in a community of the mad. Sometimes I feel like the one blind man where all others see. The one groping savage in the college of the learned, and always during service I feel like a heretic in heaven. But by no means do I ever overlook or minimize the fact that this is one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. I have never seen anything like this before. I have never seen anything so great and fine and real as this devotion. Friday. Yesterday's opera was Parsifal again. The others went, and they show marked advance in appreciation. But I went hunting for relics and reminders of the Margravine Wilhelmina, she of the imperishable memoirs. I am properly grateful to her for her unconscious satire upon monarchy and nobility, and therefore nothing which her hand touched or her eye looked upon is indifferent to me. I am her pilgrim. The rest of this multitude here are Wagner's. Tuesday. I have seen my last 2 operas. My season is ended, and we cross over into Bohemia this afternoon. I was supposing that my musical regeneration was accomplished and perfected, because I enjoyed both of these operas, singing and all, and, moreover, one of them was Parsifal. But the experts have disenchanted me. They say, "Singing! That wasn't singing. That was the wailing and screeching of third-rate obscurities palmed off on us in the interest of economy. Well, I ought to have recognized the sign, the old sure sign that has never failed me in matters of art. Whenever I enjoy anything in art, it means that it is mighty poor. The private knowledge of this fact has saved me from going to pieces with enthusiasm in front of many and many a chromo. However, my base instinct does me profit sometimes. I was the only man out of 3,200 who got his money back on those two operas. Mark Twain. End of Mark Twain at Beirut, read by John Greenman. This is section 3 of Mark Twain's travel letters from 1891 to 1892. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. From the Chicago Sunday Tribune of January 3, 1892, Playing the Courier by Mark Twain, read by John Greenman. Time would come when we must go from Aix-les-Bains to Geneva, and from thence by a series of day-long and tangled journeys to Bayreuth in Bavaria. I should have to have a courier, of course, to take care of so considerable a party as mine, but I procrastinated. The time slipped along, and at last I woke up one day to the fact that we were ready to move and had no courier. I then resolved upon what I felt was a foolhardy thing, but I was in the humor of it. I said I would make the first stage without help. I did it. I brought the party from Aix to Geneva by myself. 4 people. The distance was 2 hours and more, and there was one change of cars. There was not an accident of any kind, except leaving a valise and some other matters on the platform, a thing which can hardly be called an accident, it is so common. So I offered to conduct the party all the way to Bayreuth. This was a blunder, though it did not seem so at the time. There was more detail than I thought there would be. 1. 2 persons, whom we had left in a Genevan pension some weeks before, must be collected and brought to the hotel. 2. I must notify the people on the Grand Quay who store trunks to bring 7 of our stored trunks to the hotel and carry back 7 which they would find piled in the lobby. 3. I must find out what part of Europe Bayreuth was in, and buy 7 railway tickets for that point. 4. I must send a telegram to my friends in the Netherlands. 5. It was now 2 in the afternoon, and we must look sharp and be ready for the first night train and make sure of sleeping car tickets. 6. I must draw money at the bank. It seemed to me that the sleeping car tickets must be the most important thing, so I went to the station myself to make sure. Hotel messengers are not always brisk people. It was a hot day, and I ought to have driven, but it seemed better economy to walk. It did not turn out so, because I lost my way and trebled the distance. I applied for the tickets, and they asked me which route I wanted to go by, and that embarrassed me and made me lose my head. There were so many people standing around, and I not knowing anything about the routes, and not supposing there were going to be 2. So I judged it best to go back and map out the road and come again. I took a cab this time, but on my way upstairs at the hotel I remembered that I was out of cigars, so I thought it would be well to get some while the matter was in my mind. It was only around the corner, and I didn't need the cab. I asked the cabman to wait where he was. Thinking of the telegram and trying to word it in my head, I forgot the cigars and the cab and walked on indefinitely. I was going to have the hotel people send the telegram, but as I could not be far from the post office by this time, I thought I would do it myself. But it was farther than I had supposed. I found the place at last, and wrote the telegram and handed it in. The clerk was a severe-looking, fidgety man, and he began to fire French questions at me in such a liquid form that I could not detect the joints between his words, and this made me lose my head again. But an Englishman stepped up and said the clerk wanted to know where he was to send the telegram. I could not tell him because it was not my telegram, and I explained that I was merely sending it for a member of my party. But nothing would pacify the clerk but the address, so I said that if he was so particular I would go back and get it. However, I thought I would go and collect those lacking two persons first, for it would be best to do everything systematically and in order, and one detail at a time. Then I remembered the cab was eating up my substance down at the hotel yonder, so I called another cab and told the man to go down and fetch it to the post office and wait till I came. I had a long, hot walk to collect those people, and when I got there they couldn't come with me because they had heavy satchels and must have a cab. I went away to find one, but before I ran across any I noticed that I had reached the neighborhood of the Grand Quay, at least I thought I had, so I judged I could save time by stepping around and arranging about the trunks. I stepped around about a mile, and although I did not find the Grand Quay, I found a cigar shop and remembered about the cigars. I said I was going to Bayreuth, and I wanted enough for the journey. The man asked me which route I was going to take. I said I did not know. He said he would recommend me to go by Zurich and various other places which he named, and offered to sell me 7 second-class through tickets for $22 apiece, which would be throwing off the discount which the railroads allowed him. I was already tired of riding second class on first-class tickets, so I took him up. By and by I found Natural and Company's storage office, and told them to send 7 of our trunks to the hotel and pile them up in the lobby. It seemed to me that I was not delivering the whole of the message, still it was all I could find in my head. Next I found the bank and asked for some money, but I had left my letter of credit somewhere and was not able to draw. I remembered now that I must have left it lying on the table where I wrote my telegram, so I got a cab and drove to the post office and went upstairs, and they said that a letter of credit had indeed been left on the table, but that it was now in the hands of the police authorities, and it would be necessary for me to go there and prove property. They sent a boy with me, and we went out the back way and walked a couple of miles and found the place, and then I remembered about my cabs and asked the boy to send them to me when he got back to the post office. It was nightfall now, and the mayor had gone to dinner. I thought I would go to dinner myself, but the officer on duty thought differently, and I stayed. The mayor dropped in at 10:30, but said it was too late to do anything tonight. Come at 9:30 in the morning. The officer wanted to keep me all night, and said I was a suspicious-looking person, and probably did not own the letter of credit, and didn't know what a letter of credit was, but merely saw the real owner leave it lying on the table and wanted to get it because I was probably a person that would want anything he could get, whether it was valuable or not. But the mayor said he saw nothing suspicious about me, and that I seemed a harmless person, and nothing the matter with me but a wandering mind, and not much of that. So I thanked him, and he set me free, and I went home in my 3 cabs. As I was dog-tired, and in no condition to answer questions with discretion, I thought I would not disturb the expedition at that time of night, as there was a vacant room I knew of at the other end of the hall. But I did not quite arrive there, as a watch had been set, the expedition being anxious about me. I was placed in a galling situation. The expedition sat stiff and forbidding on 4 chairs in a row, with shawls and things all on, satchels and guidebooks in lap. They had been sitting like that for 4 hours. and the glass going down all the time. Yes, and they were waiting for me. It seemed to me that nothing but a sudden happily contrived and brilliant tour de force could break this iron front and make a diversion in my favor. So I shied my hat into the arena and followed it with a skip and a jump, shouting blithely, "Ha ha! Here we all are, Mr. Merryman!" Nothing could be deeper or stiller than the absence of applause which followed. But I kept on. There seemed no other way, though my confidence, poor enough before, had got a deadly check, and was in effect gone. I tried to be jocund out of a heavy heart. I tried to touch the other hearts there, and soften the bitter resentment in those faces, by throwing off bright and airy fun, and making of the whole ghastly thing a joyously humorous incident. But this idea was not well conceived. It was not the right atmosphere for it. I got not one smile, not one line in those offended faces relaxed. I thawed nothing of the winter that looked out of those frosty eyes. I started one more breezy, poor effort, but the head of the expedition cut into the center of it and said, "Where have you been?" I saw by the manner of this that the idea was to get down to cold business now. So I began my travels, but was cut short again. "Where are the two others? We have been in frightful anxiety about them." "Oh, they're all right. I was to fetch a cab. I will go straight off, and—"
"Sit down. Don't you know it is 11 o'clock? Where did you leave them?"
"At the pension."
"Why didn't you bring them?"
"Because we couldn't carry the satchels, and so I thought—"
"Thought? You should not try to think. One cannot think without the proper machinery. It is 2 miles to that pension. Did you go there without a cab?"
Well, I didn't intend to. It only happened so."
"How did it happen so?"
"Because I was at the post office, and I remember that I had left a cab waiting here, and so, to stop that expense, I sent another cab to—
"To what?"
Well, I don't remember now, but I think the new cab was to have the hotel pay the old cab and send it away."
"What good would that do?"
"What good would it do? It would stop the expense, wouldn't it?"
"By putting the new cab in its place to continue the expense?"
I didn't say anything.
"Why didn't you have the new cab come back for you?"
"Oh, well, that is what I did. I remember now. Yes, that is what I did, because I recollect that when I—"
"Well, then, why didn't it come back for you?"
"To the post office? Why, it did."
"Very well, then. How did you come to walk to the pension?"
I don't quite remember how that happened. Oh, yes, I do remember now. I wrote the dispatch to send to the Netherlands, and—
"Oh, thank goodness you did accomplish something. I wouldn't have had you fail to send— What makes you look like that?" "You are trying to avoid my eye. That dispatch is the most important thing that you haven't sent that dispatch."
I haven't said I didn't send it."
"You don't need to. Oh, dear, I wouldn't have had that telegram fail for anything. Why didn't you send it?"
Well, you see, with so many things to do and think of, they're very particular there, and after I had written the telegram—
"Oh, never mind, let it go. Explanations can't help the matter now. What will he think of us?"
"Oh, that's all right, that's all right. He'll think we gave the telegram to the hotel people, and that they—"
"Why, certainly. Why didn't you do that? There was no other rational way."
"Yes, I know, but then I had it on my mind that I must be sure to get to the bank and draw some money."
"Well, you are entitled to some credit, after all, for thinking of that, and I don't wish to be too hard on you, though you must acknowledge yourself that you have cost us all a good deal of trouble, and some of it not necessary. How much did you draw?"
"Well, I had an idea that—
"That what?"
that— well, it seems to me that in the circumstances, so many of us, you know, and—
"What are you mooning about? Do turn your face this way and let me. Why, you haven't drawn any money. Well, the banker said. Never mind what the banker said. You must have had a reason of your own. Not a reason exactly, but something which.
Well, then, the simple fact was that I hadn't my letter of credit.
Hadn't your letter of credit?
Hadn't my letter of credit.
Don't repeat me like that. Where was it?
At the post office.
What was it doing there?
Well, I forgot it and left it there.
Upon my word, I've seen a good many couriers, but of all the couriers that ever
I've done the best I could.
Well, so you have, poor thing, and I'm wrong to abuse you so when you've been working yourself to death while we've been sitting here only thinking of our vexations instead of feeling grateful for what you were trying to do for us. It will all come out right. We can take the 7:30 train in the morning just as well. You've bought the tickets?
I have, and it's a bargain, too. Second class.
I'm glad of it. Everybody else travels second class, and we might just as well save that ruinous extra charge. What did you pay?
$22 apiece, through to Bayreuth.
Why, I didn't know you could buy through tickets anywhere but in London and Paris.
Some people can't, maybe, but some people can, of whom I am one of which, it appears.
It seems a rather high price.
On the contrary, the dealer knocked off his commission.
Dealer?
Yes, I bought them at a cigar shop.
That reminds me, we shall have to get up pretty early, and so there should be no packing to do. Your umbrella, your rubbers, your cigars. Oh, what is the matter?
Hang it, I've left the cigars at the bank.
Just think of it. Well, your umbrella.
I'll have that all right. There's no hurry.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, that's all right. I'll take care of.
Where is that umbrella?
It's just the merest step. It won't take me.
Where is it?
Well, I think I left it at the cigar shop, but
Anyway, take your feet out from under that thing. It's just as I expected. Where are your rubbers?
well,
Where are your rubbers?
it's got so dry now. Well, everybody says there's not going to be another drop.
Where are your rubbers?
Well, you see, it was this way. First, the officer said,
What officer?
police officer, but the mayor,
What mayor?
mayor of Geneva.
But I said, wait, what is the matter with you?
Who, me?
Nothing. They both tried to persuade me to stay, and stay where?
Well, the fact is,
Where have you been? What's kept you out till 10:30 at night?
oh, you see, after I lost my letter of credit,
You are beating around the bush a good deal. Now answer the question in just one straightforward word. Where are those rubbers?
well, they're in the county jail.
I started a placating smile, but it petrified. The climate was unsuitable.
Spending 3 or 4 hours in jail did not seem to the expedition humorous. Neither did it to me at bottom. I had to explain the whole thing, and of course it came out that we couldn't take the early train, because that would leave my letter of credit in Hoxstill. It did look as if we had all got to go to bed estranged and unhappy, but by good luck that was prevented. There happened to be mention of the trunks, and I was able to say I had attended to that feature.
There, you are just as good and thoughtful and painstaking and intelligent as you can be, and it's a shame to find so much fault with you, and there shan't be another word of it. You've done beautifully, admirably, and I'm sorry I ever said one ungrateful word to you.
This bit deeper than some of the other things, and made me uncomfortable, because I wasn't feeling as solid about that trunk errand as I wanted to. There seemed somehow to be a defect about it somewhere, though I couldn't put my finger on it, and didn't like to stir the matter just now, it being late and maybe well enough to let well enough alone. Of course there was music in the morning, when it was found that we couldn't leave by the early train, but I had no time to wait. I got only the opening bars of the overture, and then started out to get my letter of credit. It seemed a good time to look into the trunk business, and rectify it if it needed it, and I had a suspicion that it did. I was too late. The concierge said he had shipped the trunks to Zurich the evening before. I asked him how he could do that without exhibiting passage tickets. "Not necessary in Switzerland. You pay for your trunks and send them where you please. Nothing goes free but your hand baggage." "How much did you pay on them?" 140 francs. $28. There's something wrong about that trunk business, sure. Next I met the portier. He said, "You have not slept well, is it not? You have the worn look. If you would like a courier, a good one has arrived last night, and is not engaged for 5 days already, by the name of Ludi. We recommend him. Das Heiss, the Grand Hotel Beau Rivage, recommends him." I declined with coldness. My spirit was not broken yet, and I did not like having my condition taken notice of in this way. I was at the county jail by 9 o'clock, hoping that the mayor might chance to come before his regular hour, but he didn't. It was dull there. Every time I offered to touch anything, or look at anything, or do anything, or refrain from doing anything, the policeman said it was défendez. I thought I would practice my French on him, but he wouldn't have that either. It seemed to make him particularly bitter to hear his own tongue. The mayor came at last, and then there was no trouble, for the minute he convened the Supreme Court, which they always do whenever there is valuable property in dispute, and got everything shipshape and sentries posted and had prayer by the chaplain, my unsealed letter was opened, and there wasn't anything in it but some photographs, because, as I remember now, I had taken out the letter of credit so as to make room for the photographs, and had put the letter in my other pocket, which I proved to everybody's satisfaction by fetching it out and showing it with a good deal of exultation. So then the court looked at each other in a vacant kind of way, and then at me, and then at each other again, and finally let me go, but said it was imprudent for me to be at large, and asked me what my profession was. I said I was a courier. They lifted up their eyes in a kind of reverent way, and said, "Du lieber Gott," and I said a word of courteous thanks for their apparent admiration, and hurried off to the bank. However, being a courier was already making me a great stickler for order and system, and one thing at a time, and each thing in its own proper turn. So I passed by the bank and branched off and started for the 2 lacking members of the expedition. A cab taxied by, and I took it upon persuasion. I gained no speed by this, but it was a reposeful turnout, and I liked the reposefulness. The week-long jubilations over the 600th anniversary of the birth of Swiss liberty and the signing of the compact were at flood tide, and all the streets were clothed in fluttering flags. The horse and the driver had been drunk 3 days and nights, and had known no stall nor bed meantime. They looked, as I felt, dreamy and seedy. But we arrived in the course of time. I went in and rang, and asked a housemaid to rush out the lacking members. She said something which I did not understand, and I returned to the chariot. The girl had probably told me that those people did not belong on her floor, and that it would be judicious for me to go higher and ring from floor to floor till I found them. For in those Swiss flats there does not seem to be any way to find the right family but to be patient and guess your way along up. I calculated that I must wait 15 minutes, there being 3 details inseparable from an occasion of this sort. First, put on hats and come down and climb in. Second, return of one to get my other glove. Third, presently return of the other one to fetch My French verbs at a glance. I would muse during the 15 minutes and take it easy. A very still and blank interval ensued, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder and started. The intruder was a policeman. I glanced up and perceived that there was new scenery. There was a good deal of a crowd, and they had that pleased and interested look which such a crowd wears when they see that somebody is out of luck. The horse was asleep, and so was the driver, and some boys had hung them and me full of gaudy decorations, stolen from the innumerable banner poles. It was a scandalous spectacle. The officer said, "I'm sorry, but we can't have you sleeping here all day." I was wounded and said with dignity, "I beg your pardon, I was not sleeping, I was thinking." "Well, you can think if you want to, but you've got to think to yourself. You disturb the whole neighborhood." It was a poor joke, but it made the crowd laugh. I snore at night sometimes, but it is not likely that I would do such a thing in the daytime and in such a place. The officer undecorated us and seemed sorry for our friendliness, and really tried to be humane, but he said we mustn't stop there any longer, or he would have to charge us rent. It was the law, he said, and he went on to say, in a sociable way, that I was looking pretty moldy, and he wished he knew. I shut him off pretty austerely, and said I hoped one might celebrate a little these days, especially when one was personally concerned. "Personally?" he asked. "How?" "Because 600 years ago an ancestor of mine signed the contract." He reflected a moment, then looked me over and said, "Ancestor? It's my opinion you signed it yourself, for of all the old ancient relics that ever but never mind about that. What is it you are waiting here for so long?" I said, "I'm not waiting here so long at all. I'm waiting 15 minutes till they forget a glove and a book and go back and get them." Then I told him who they were that I had come for. He was very obliging, and began to shout inquiries to the tiers of heads and shoulders projecting from the windows above us. Then a woman away up there sang out, "Oh, they! Why, I got them a cab, and they left here long ago. 8:30, I should say." It was annoying. I glanced at my watch, but didn't say anything. The officer said, "It is 11:45, you see. You should have inquired better. You have been asleep 3/4 of an hour, and in such a sun as this. You are baked black. It is wonderful, and you will miss your train, perhaps. You interest me greatly. What is your occupation?" I said I was a courier, and it seemed to stun him, and before he could come to, we were gone. When I arrived in the 3rd story of the hotel, I found our quarters vacant. I was not surprised. The moment a courier takes his eye off his tribe, they go shopping. The nearer it is to train time, the surer they are to go. I sat down to try and think out what I had best do next, but presently the hall boy found me there and said the expedition had gone to the station half an hour before. It was the first time I had known them to do a rational thing, and it was very confusing. This is one of the things that make a courier's life so difficult and uncertain. Just as matters are going the smoothest, his people will strike a lucid interval, and down go all the arrangements to wreck and ruin. The train was to leave at 12 noon sharp. It was now 10 minutes after 12. I could be at the station in 10 minutes. I saw I had no great amount of leeway, for this was the Lightning Express, and on the continent the Lightning Expresses are pretty fastidious about getting away some time during the advertised day. My people were the only ones remaining in the waiting-room. Everybody else had passed through and mounted the train, as they say in those regions. They were exhausted with the nervousness and fret, but I comforted them and heartened them up, and we made our rush. But no, we were out of luck again. The doorkeeper was not satisfied with the tickets. He examined them cautiously, deliberately, suspiciously, then glared at me a while, and after that he called another official. The two examined the tickets and called another official. These called others, and the convention discussed and gesticulated and carried on until I begged that they would consider how time was flying and just pass a few resolutions and let us go. Then they said very courteously that there was a defect in the tickets and asked me where I got them. I judged I saw what the trouble was now. You see, I had bought the tickets in a cigar shop, and of course the tobacco smell was on them. Without doubt the thing they were up to was to work the tickets through the custom house and collect duty on that smell. So I resolved to be perfectly frank. It is sometimes the best way. I said, "Gentlemen, I will not deceive you. These railway tickets—" "Ah, pardon, monsieur. These are not railway tickets." "Oh," I said, "is that the defect?" "Ah, truly, yes, monsieur. These are lottery tickets, yes? And it is a lottery which has been drawn 2 years ago." I affected to be greatly amused. It is all one can do in such circumstances. It is all one can do, and yet there is no value in it. It deceives nobody, and you can see that everybody around pities you and is ashamed of you. One of the hardest situations in life, I think, is to be full of grief and a sense of defeat and shabbiness that way, and yet have to put on an outside of archness and gaiety, while all the time you know that your own expedition, the treasures of your heart, and whose love and reverence you are by the custom of our civilization entitled to, are being consumed with humiliation before strangers to see you earning and getting a compassion which is a stigma, a brand which certifies you to be, oh, anything and everything which is fatal to human respect. I said cheerily it was all right, just one of those little accidents that was likely to happen to anybody. I would have the right tickets in 2 minutes, and we would catch the train yet, and moreover have something to laugh about all through the journey. I did get the tickets in time, all stamped and completed, but then it turned out that I couldn't take them, because in taking so much pains about the 2 missing members, I had skipped the bank and hadn't the money. So then the train left, and there didn't seem to be anything to do but go back to the hotel, which we did, but it was kind of melancholy, and not much was said. I tried to start a few subjects, like scenery and transubstantiation and those sorts of things, but they didn't seem to hit the weather right. We had lost our good rooms, but we got some others, which were pretty scattering, but would answer. I judged things would brighten now, but the head of the expedition said, "Send up the trunks." It made me feel pretty cold. There was a doubtful something about that trunk business. I was almost sure of it. I was going to suggest, but a wave of the hand sufficiently restrained me, and I was informed that we would now camp for 3 days and see if we could rest up. I said all right, never mind ringing. I would go down and attend to the trunk myself. I got a cab and went straight to Mr. Charles Naturel's place, and asked what order it was I had left there. "To send 7 trunks to the hotel." "And were you to bring any back?" "No." "You are sure I didn't tell you to bring back 7 that would be found piled in the lobby?" "Absolutely sure you didn't." "Then the whole 14 are gone to Zurich or Jericho or somewhere, and there is going to be more debris around that hotel when the expedition—" I didn't finish, because my mind was getting to be in a good deal of a whirl, and when you are that way you think you have finished a sentence when you haven't, and you go mooning and dreaming away, and the first thing you know you get run over by a dray or a cow or something. I left the cab there. I forgot it, and on my way back I thought it all out and concluded to resign, because otherwise I should be nearly sure to be discharged. But I didn't believe it would be a good idea to resign in person. I could do it by message. So I sent for Mr. Ludi and explained that there was a courier going to resign on account of incompatibility or fatigue or something, and as he had 4 or 5 vacant days, I would like to insert him into that vacancy if he thought he could fill it. When everything was arranged, I got him to go up and say to the expedition that, owing to an error made by Mr. Natural's people, we were out of trunks here and would have plenty in Zurich, and we'd better take the first train, freight, gravel, or construction, and move right along. He attended to that and came down with an invitation for me to go up. Yes, certainly. And while we walked along over to the bank to get money and collect my cigars and tobacco, and to the cigar shop to trade back the lottery tickets and get my umbrella, and to Mr. Natural's to pay that cab and send it away, and to the county jail to get my rubbers, and leave PPC cards for the mayor and Supreme Court. He described the weather to me that was prevailing on the upper levels there with the expedition, and I saw that I was doing very well where I was. I stayed out in the woods till 4 p.m. to let the weather moderate, and then turned up at the station just in time to take the 5 o'clock express for Zurich, along with the expedition, now in the hands of Mr. Ludi, who conducted its complex affairs with little apparent effort or inconvenience. Well, I had worked like a slave while I was in office, and done the very best I knew how. Yet all that these people dwelt upon, or seemed to care to remember, was the defects of my administration, not its creditable features. They would skip over 1,000 creditable features to remark upon and reiterate and fuss about just one fact, till it seemed to me they would wear it out, and not much of a fact either, taken by itself, the fact that I elected myself courier in Geneva, and put in work enough to carry a circus to Jerusalem, and yet never even got my gang out of the town. I finally said I didn't wish to hear any more about the subject. It made me tired, and I told them to their faces that I would never be a courier again to save anybody's life. And if I live long enough, I'll prove it. I think it's a difficult, brain-racking, overworked, and thoroughly ungrateful office, and the main bulk of its wages is a sore heart and a bruised spirit. Mark Twain. End of Playing the Courier by Mark Twain. Read by John Greenman. This is section 4 of Mark Twain's travel letters from 1891 to 92. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. An Austrian Health Factory by Mark Twain. Read by John Greenman with help from Eberhard Schneider. This place is the village of Marienbad, Bohemia. It seems no very great distance from Annecy in Haute-Savoie to this place. You make it in less than 30 hours by these continental express trains, but the changes in the scenery are great. They are quite out of proportion to the distance covered. From Annecy by Aix to Geneva you have blue lakes with bold mountains springing from their borders, and far glimpses of snowy wastes lifted against the horizon beyond, while all about you is a garden cultivated to the last possibility of grace and beauty, a cultivation which doesn't stop with the handy lower levels, but is carried right up to the sheer steeps, and propped there with ribs of masonry, and made to stay there in spite of Newton's law. Beyond Geneva, beyond Lausanne, at any rate, you have for a while a country which noticeably resembles New England, and seems out of place, and like an intruder who is wearing his everyday clothes at a fancy dress ball. But presently, on your right, huge green mountain ramparts rise up, and after that, for hours, you are absorbed in watching the rich shadow effects which they furnish, and are only dully aware that New England is gone, and that you are flying past quaint and unspeakably old towns and towers. Next day you have the Lake of Zurich, and presently the Rhine is swinging by you. How clean it is, how clear it is, how blue it is, how green it is, how swift and rollicking and insolent is its gait and style, how vivid and splendid its colors, beautiful wreck and chaos of all the soap bubbles in the universe. A person born on the Rhine must worship it. I saw the blue Rhine sweep along. I heard, or seemed to hear, the German songs we used to sing in chorus sweet and clear. Yes, that is where his heart would be. That is where his last thoughts would be. The soldier of the Legion who lay dying in Algiers. And by you are in a German region, which you discover to be quite different from the recent Swiss lands behind you. You have a sea before you, that is to say, the green land goes rolling away in ocean swells to the horizon. And there is another new feature. Here and there, at wide intervals, you have islands, hills 200 and 300 feet high, of a haystack form, that rise abruptly out of the green plain, and are wooded solidly to the top. On the top there is just room for a ruined castle, and there it is every time. Above the summit you see the crumbling arches and broken towers projecting. Beyond Stuttgart, next day, you find other changes still. By and by, approaching and leaving Nuremberg, and down by Neuhaus, your landscape is humped everywhere with scattered knobs of rock, unsociable crags of a rude, tower-like look, and thatched with grass and vines and bushes. And now and then you have gorges, too, of a modest pattern as to size, with precipice walls curiously carved and honeycombed by I don't know what, but water, no doubt. The changes are not done yet, for the instant the country finds it is out of Württemberg and into Bavaria, it discards one more thickness of soil to go with previous disrobings, and then nothing remains over the bones but the shift. There may be a poorer soil somewhere, but it is not likely. A couple of hours from Bayreuth you cross into Bohemia, and before long you reach this Marienbad and recognize another sharp change, the change from the long ago to today, that is to say, from the very old to the spick and span new, from an architecture totally without shapeliness or ornament to an architecture attractively equipped with both, from universal dismalness as to color to universal brightness and beauty of tint, from a town which seems made up of prisons to a town which is made up of gracious and graceful mansions, proper to the light of heart and crimeless. It is like jumping out of Jerusalem into Chicago. The more I think of these many changes, the more surprising the thing seems. I have never made so picturesque a journey before, and surely there cannot be another trip of like length in the world that can furnish so much variety, and of so charming and interesting a sort. There are only 2 or 3 streets here in this snug pocket in the Hemlock Hills, but they are handsome. When you stand at the foot of a street and look up the slant of it, you see only block fronts of graceful pattern, with happily broken lines, and the pleasing accent of bay projections and balconies in orderly disorder and harmonious confusion, and always the color is fresh and cheery, various shades of cream, with softly contrasting trimmings of white, and now and then a touch of dim red. These blocks are all thick-walled, solid, massive, tall, for this is Europe, but it is the brightest and
newest-looking town on the continent, and as pretty as anybody could require. The steep hills spring high aloft from the very back doors, and are clothed densely to their tops with hemlocks. In Bavaria everybody is in uniform, and you wonder where the private citizens are, but here in Bohemia the uniforms are very rare. Occasionally one catches a glimpse of an Austrian officer, but it is only occasionally. Uniforms are so scarce that we seem to be in a republic. Almost the only striking figure is the Polish Jew. He is very frequent. He is tall and of grave countenance, and wears a coat that reaches to his ankle bones, and he has a little wee curl or two in front of each ear. He has a preposterous look, and seems to be as much respected as anybody. The crowds that drift along the promenade at music time twice a day are fashionably dressed after the Parisian pattern, and they look a good deal alike, but they speak a lot of languages which you have not encountered before, and no ignorant person can spell their names, and they can't pronounce them themselves. Marienbad, Mary's bath. The Mary is the Virgin. She is the patroness of these curative springs. They try to cure everything: gout, rheumatism, leanness, fatness, dyspepsia, and all the rest. The whole thing is the property of a convent, and has been for 600 or 700 years. However, there was never a boom here until a quarter of a century ago. A tough health drill. If a person has the gout, this is what they do with him. They have him out at 5:30 in the morning, and give him an egg, and let him look at a cup of tea. At 6 he must be at his particular spring, with his tumbler hanging at his belt, and he will have plenty of company there. At the first note of the orchestra he must lift his tumbler and begin to sip his dreadful water with the rest. He must sip slowly, and be a long time at it. Then he must tramp about the hills for an hour or so, and get all the exercise and fresh air possible. Then he takes his tub, or wallows in his mud, if mud baths are his sort. By noon he has a fine appetite, and the rules allow him to turn himself loose now and satisfy it, so long as he is careful and eats only such things as he doesn't want. He puts in the afternoon walking the hills and filling up with fresh air. At night he is allowed to take 3 ounces of any kind of food he doesn't like, and drink 1 glass of any kind of liquor that he has a prejudice against. He may also smoke 1 pipe, if he isn't used to it. At 9:30 sharp he must be in bed and his candle out. Repeat the whole thing next day. I don't see any advantage in this over having the gout. In the case of most diseases, that is about what one is required to undergo, and if you have any pleasant habit that you value, they want that. They want that the first thing. They make you drop everything that gives an interest to life. Their idea is to reverse your whole system of existence and make a regenerating revolution. If you are a Republican, they make you talk free trade. If you are a Democrat, they make you talk protection. If you are a prohibitionist, you have got to go to bed drunk every night till you get well. They spare nothing. They spare nobody. Reform, reform, that is their whole song. If a person is an orator, they gag him. If he likes to read, they won't let him. If he wants to sing, they make him whistle. They say they can cure any ailment, and they do seem to do it. But why should a patient come all the way here?
Why shouldn't he do these things at home and save the money? No disease would stay with a person who treated it like that. I didn't come here to take baths. I only came to look around. But first one person and then another began to throw out hints, and pretty soon I was a good deal concerned about myself. One of these gouties here said I had a gouty look about the eye. Next, a person who has catarrh of the intestines asked me if I didn't notice a little dim sort of stomach ache when I sneezed. I hadn't before, but I did seem to notice it then. A man that's here for heart disease said he wouldn't come downstairs so fast if he had my build and aspect. A person with an old gold complexion said a man died here in a mud bath last week that had a petrified liver. Good deal such a looking man as I am, and the same initials, and so on and so on. Of course there was nothing to be uneasy about, and I wasn't what you may call really uneasy, but I was not feeling very well, that is, not brisk, and I went to bed. I suppose that was not a good idea, because then they had me. I started in at the upper end of the mill and went through. I am said to be all right now and free from disease, but this does not surprise me. What I have been through in these 2 weeks would free a person of pretty much everything in him that wasn't nailed there, any loose thing, any unattached fragment of bone or meat or morals or disease or propensities or accomplishments or what not. And I don't say but that I feel well enough. I feel better than I would if I was dead, I reckon. And besides, they say that I am going to build up now and come right along and be all right. I am not saying anything, but I wish I had enough of my diseases back to make me aware of myself, and enough of my habits to make it worth while to live. To have nothing the matter with you and no habits is pretty tame, pretty colorless. It is just the way a saint feels, I reckon. It is at least the way he looks. I never could stand a saint. That reminds me that you see very few priests around here, and yet, as I have already said, this whole big enterprise is owned and managed by a convent. The few priests one does see here are dressed like human beings, and so there may be more of them than I imagine. 15 priests dressed like these could not attract as much of your attention as would one priest at Aix-les-Bains. You cannot pull your eye loose from the French priest so long as he is in sight. His dress is so fascinatingly ugly. A singular climate. I seem to be wandering from the subject, but I am not. This is about the coldest place I ever saw, and the wettest, too. This August seems like an English November to me. Rain? Why, it seems to like to rain here. It seems to rain every time there is a chance. You are strictly required to be out airing and exercising whenever the sun is shining. So I hate to see the sun shine, because I hate air and exercise. Duty air and duty exercise taken for medicine. It seems ungenuine, out of season, degraded to sordid utilities, a subtle spiritual something gone from it, which one can't describe in words, but don't you understand? With that something gone, what is left is but canned air, canned exercise, and you don't want it. When the sun does shine for a few moments or a few hours, these people swarm out and flock through the streets and over the hills and through the pine woods and make the most of the chance, and I have flocked out too on some of those occasions, but as a rule I stay in and try to get warm. And what is there for means besides heavy clothing and rugs, and the polished white tomb that stands lofty and heartless in the corner, and thinks it is a stove? Of all the creations of human insanity, this thing is the most forbidding. Whether it is heating the room or isn't, the expression is the same, cold indifference. You can't tell which it is doing without going and putting your hand on it. They burn little handfuls of kindling in it, no substantial wood, and no coal. The fire burns out every 15 minutes, and there is no way to tell when this has happened. On these dismal days, with the rain steadily falling, it is no better company than a corpse. A roaring hickory fire, with the cordial flames leaping up the chimney. But I must not think of such things. They make a person homesick. This is a most strange place to come to get rid of disease. That is what you think most of the time. But in the intervals when the sun shines and you are tramping the hills and are comparatively warm, you get to be neutral, maybe even friendly. I went up to the Aussichtsturm the other day. This is a tower which stands on the summit of a steep hemlock mountain here, a tower which there isn't the least use for, because the view is as good at the base of it as it is at the top of it. But Germanic people are just mad for views. They never get enough of a view. If they owned Mont Blanc, they would build a tower on top of it. The roads up that mountain through that hemlock forest are hard-packed and smooth, and the grades are easy and comfortable. They are for walkers, not for carriages. You move through deep silence and twilight, and you seem to be in a million-column temple. Whether you look up the hill or down it, you catch glimpses of distant figures flitting without sound, appearing and disappearing in the dim distances among the stems of the trees, and it is all very spectral and solemn and impressive. Now and then the gloom is accented and sized up to your comprehension in a striking way. A ray of sunshine finds its way down through and suddenly calls your attention, for where it falls, far up the hill slope in the brown duskiness, it lays a stripe that has a glare like lightning. The utter stillness of the forest depths, the soundless hush, the total absence of stir or motion of any kind in leaf or branch, are things which we have no experience of at home, and consequently no name for in our language. At home there would be the plaint of insects and the twittering of birds, and vagrant breezes would quiver the foliage. Here it is the stillness of death. This is what the Germans are forever talking about, dreaming about, and despairingly trying to catch and imprison in a poem or a picture or a song. Their adored Waldeinsamkeit, loneliness of the woods. But how catch it? It has not a body, it is a spirit. We don't talk about it in America, or dream of it, or sing about it, because we haven't it. Certainly there is something wonderfully alluring about it, beguiling, dreamy, unworldly. Where the gloom is softest and richest, and the peace and stillness deepest, far upon the sides of that hemlock mountain, a spot where Goethe used to sit and dream is marked by a granite obelisk, and on its side is carved this famous poem, which is the master's idea of Waldeinsamkeit.
Über allen Gipfeln ist Ruh, in allen Wipfeln spürst du kaum einen Hauch. Die Vögelein schweigen im Walde, warte nur, balde ruhest du auch.
It is raining again now. However, it was doing that before. I have been over to the establishment and had a tub bath with 2 kinds of pine juice in it. These fill the room with a pungent and most pleasant perfume.
They also turn the water to the color of ink, and cover it with snowy suds 2 or 3 inches deep. The bath is cool, about 75 degrees or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and there is a cooler shower bath after it. While waiting in the reception room, all by myself, 2 men came in and began to talk. Politics? Literature? Religion? No, their ailments. There is no other subject here, apparently. Wherever 2 or 3 of these people are gathered together, there you have it, every time. The first that can get his mouth open contributes his disease and the condition of it, and the others follow with theirs. The 2 men just referred to were acquaintances, and they followed the custom. One of them was built like a gasometer, and here to reduce his girth. The other was built like a derrick, and is here to fat up, as they express it, at this resort. They were well satisfied with the progress they were making. The gasometer had lost 1/4 of a ton in 10 days, and showed the record on his belt with pride, and he walked briskly across the room, smiling in a vast and luminous way, like a harvest moon, and said he couldn't have done that when he arrived here. He buttoned his coat around his equator, and showed how loose it was. It was pretty to see his happiness. It was so childlike and honest. He set his feet together and leaned out over his person and proved that he could see them. He said he hadn't seen them from that point before for 15 years. He had a hand like a boxing glove, and on one of his fingers he had just found a diamond ring which he had missed 11 years ago. The minute the derrick got a chance, he broke in and began to tell how he was piling on blubber right along 3/4 of an ounce every 4 days, and he was still piping away when I was sent for. I left the fat man standing there panting and blowing and swelling and collapsing like a balloon, his next speech all ready and urgent for delivery. The patients are always at that sort of thing, trying to talk one another to death. The fat ones and the lean ones are nearly the worst at it, but not quite. The dyspeptics are the worst. They are at it all day and all night and all along. They have more symptoms than all the others put together, and so there is more variety of experience, more change of condition, more adventure, and consequently more play for the imagination, more scope for lying, and in every way a bigger field to talk. Go where you will, hide where you may, you cannot escape that word liver. You overhear it constantly, in the street, in the shop, in the theater, in the music grounds. Wherever you see 2 or a dozen people of ordinary bulk talking together, you know they are talking about their livers. When you first arrive here your new acquaintances seem sad and hard to talk to, but pretty soon you get the lay of the land and the hand of things, and after that you haven't any more trouble. You look into the dreary, dull eye and softly say, "Well, how's your liver?" You will see that dim eye flash up with a grateful flame, and you will see that jaw begin to work, and you will recognize that nothing is required of you from this out but to listen as long as you remain conscious. After a few days you will begin to notice that out of these people's talk a gospel is framing itself, and next you will find yourself believing it. It is this, that a man is not what his rearing, his schooling, his beliefs, his principles make him. He is what his liver makes him. That with a healthy liver he will have the clear-seeing eye, the honest heart, the sincere mind, the loving spirit, the loyal soul, the truth and trust and faith that are based as Gibraltar is based, and that with an unhealthy liver he must and will have the opposite of all these. He will see nothing as it really is. He cannot trust anybody or believe in anything. His moral foundations are gone from under him. Now, isn't that interesting? I think it is. 2 days ago,
perceiving that there was something unusual the matter with me, I went around from doctor to doctor, but without avail. They said they had never seen this kind of symptoms before, at least not all of them. They had seen some of them, but differently arranged. It was a new disease as far as they could see. Apparently it was scrofulous, but of a new kind. That was as much as they felt able to say. Then they made a stethoscopic examination and decided that if anything would dislodge it, a mud bath was the thing. It was a very ingenious idea. I took the mud bath, and it did dislodge it. Here it is. Love Song. I ask not, is thy heart still sure, thy love still warm, thy faith secure? I ask not, dream'st thou still of me, long'st away to fly with me? Ah, no, but as the sun includeth all the good gifts of the giver, I sum all those in asking thee, O sweetheart, how is your liver? For if thy liver worketh right, thy faith stands sure, thy hope is bright. Their dreams are sweet, and I their God. Doubt threats in vain, thou scorned his rod. Keep only thy digestion clear, no other foe my love doth fear. But indigestion hath the power to mar the soul's serenest hour, to crumble adamantine trust, and turn its certainties to dust, to dim the eye with nameless grief, to chill the heart with unbelief, to banish hope and faith and love, place heaven below and hell above. Then list, details are naught to me, so thou'st the sum gift of the giver. I ask thee all in asking thee, oh, darling, how's your liver? Yes, it is easy to say it is scrofulous, but I don't see the signs of it. In my opinion, it is as good poetry as I have ever written. Experts say it isn't poetry at all because it lacks the element of fiction, but that is the voice of envy, I reckon. I call it good medical poetry, and I consider that I am a judge. One of the most curious things in these countries is the street manners of the men and women. In meeting you, they come straight on without swerving a hair's breadth from the direct line and wholly ignoring your right to any part of the road. At the last moment, you must yield up your share of it and step aside, or there will be a collision. I noticed this strange barbarism first in Geneva 12 years ago. In Aix-les-Bains, where sidewalks are scarce and everybody walks in the streets, there is plenty of room, but that is no matter. You are always escaping collisions by mere quarter inches. A man or woman who is headed in such a way as to cross your course presently without a collision will actually alter his direction shade by shade and compel a collision, unless at the last instant you jump out of the way. Those folks are not dressed as ladies and gentlemen, and they do not seem to be consciously crowding you out of the road. They seem to be innocently and stupidly unaware that they are doing it. But not so in Geneva. There this class, especially the men, crowd out men, women, and girls of all rank and raiment consciously and intentionally, crowd them off the sidewalk and into the gutter. There was nothing of this sort in Bayreuth. But here, well, here the thing is astonishing. Collisions are unavoidable unless you do all the yielding yourself. Another odd thing, here this savagery is confined to the folk who wear the fine clothes. The others are courteous and considerate. A big burly Comanche, with all the signs about him of wealth and education, will tranquilly force young ladies to step off into the gutter to avoid being run down by him. It is a mistake that there is no bath that will cure people's manners. But drowning would help. However, perhaps one can't look for any real showy amount of delicacy of feeling in a country where a person is brought up to contemplate without a shudder the spectacle of women harnessed up with dogs and hauling carts. The woman is on one side of the pole, the dog on the other, and they bend to the work and tug and pant and strain, and the man tramps leisurely alongside and smokes his pipe. Often the woman is old and gray, and the man is her grandson. The Austrian national ornithological device ought to be replaced by a grandmother harnessed to a slush cart with a dog. This merely in the interest of fact. Heraldic fancy has been a little too much overworked in these countries anyway. Lately one of those curious things happened here which justify the felicitous extravagances of the stage and help us to accept them. A despondent man, bankrupt, friendless, and desperate, dropped a dose of strychnia into a bottle of whiskey and went out in the dusk to find a handy place for his purpose, which was suicide. In a lonely spot he was stopped by a tramp, who said he would kill him if he didn't give up his money. Instead of jumping at the chance of getting himself killed and thus saving himself the impropriety and annoyance of suicide, he forgot all about his late project and attacked the tramp in a most sturdy and valiant fashion. He made a good fight, but failed to win. The night passed, the morning came, and he woke out of unconsciousness to find that he had been clubbed half to death and left to perish at his leisure. Then he reached for his bottle to add the finishing touch, but it was gone. He pulled himself together and went limping away, and presently came upon the tramp stretched out stone dead with the empty bottle beside him. He had drunk the whiskey and committed suicide innocently. Now, while the man who had been cheated out of his suicide stood there bemoaning his hard luck and wondering how he might manage to raise money enough to buy some more whiskey and poison, some people of the neighborhood came by and he told them about his curious adventure. They said that this tramp had been the scourge of the neighborhood and the dread of the constabulary. The inquest passed off quietly and to everyone's satisfaction, and then the people, to testify their gratitude to the hero of the occasion, put him on the police on a good enough salary, and he is all right now and is not meditating suicide any more. Here are all the elements of the naivest Arabian tale. A man who resists robbery when he hasn't anything to be robbed of does the very best to save his life when he has come out purposely to throw it away, and finally is victorious in defeat, killing his adversary in an effectual and poetic fashion after being already hors de combat himself. Now, if you let him rise in the service and marry the chief of police's daughter, it has the requisite elements of the Oriental romance, lacking not a detail, so far as I can see. End of An Austrian Health Factory by Mark Twain. Read by John Greenman with help from Eberhard Schneider. Section 5 of Mark Twain's Travel Letters from 1891 to 1892. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mark Twain in the Cradle of Liberty, from the Chicago Sunday Tribune, March 6, 1892. Read by John Greenman. It is a good many years since I was in Switzerland last. In that remote time there was only one ladder railway in the country. That state of things is all changed. There isn't a mountain in Switzerland now that hasn't a ladder railroad or two up its back like suspenders. Indeed, some mountains are latticed with them, and 2 years hence all will be. In that day the peasant of the high altitudes will have to carry a lantern when he goes visiting in the night to keep from stumbling over railroads that have been built since his last round. And also in that day, if there shall remain a high-altitude peasant whose potato patch hasn't a railroad through it, it will make him as conspicuous as William Tell. However, there are only two best ways to travel through Switzerland. The first best is afloat. The second best is by open two-horse carriage. One can come from Lucerne to Interlaken over the Brunig by ladder railroad in an hour or so now, but you can glide smoothly in a carriage in 10, and have 2 hours for luncheon at noon. For luncheon, not for rest. There is no fatigue connected with the trip. One arrives fresh in spirit and in person in the evening, no fret in his heart, no grime on his face, no grit in his hair, not a cinder in his eye. This is the right condition of mind and body, the right and due preparation for the solemn event which closed the day, stepping with metaphorically uncovered head into the presence of the most impressive mountain mass that the globe can show, the Jungfrau. The stranger's first feeling, when suddenly confronted by that towering and awful apparition wrapped in its shroud of snow, is breathtaking astonishment. It is as if heaven's gates had swung open and exposed the throne. It is peaceful here and pleasant at Interlaken. Nothing going on, at least nothing but brilliant, life-giving sunshine. There are floods and floods of that. One may properly speak of it as going on, for it is full of the suggestion of activity. The light pours down with energy, with visible enthusiasm. This is a good atmosphere to be in, morally as well as physically. After trying the political atmosphere of the neighboring monarchies, it is healing and refreshing to breathe in air that has known no taint of slavery for 600 years, and to come among a people whose political history is great and fine, and worthy to be taught in all schools, and studied by all races and peoples. For the struggle here throughout the centuries has not been in the interest of any private family or any church, but in the interest of the whole body of the nation, and for shelter and protection of all forms of belief. This fact is colossal. If one would realize how colossal it is, and of what dignity and majesty, let him contrast it with the purposes and objects of the Crusades, the siege of York, the War of the Roses, and other historic comedies of that sort and size. Last week I was beating around the Lake of Four Cantons, and I saw Rütli and Altorf. Rütli is a remote little patch of a meadow, but I do not know how any piece of ground could be holier or better worth crossing oceans and continents to see, since it was there that the great Trinity of Switzerland joined hands 6 centuries ago and swore the oath which set their enslaved and insulted country forever free. And Altdorf is also honorable ground and worshipful, since it was there that William, surnamed Tell, which interpreted means the foolish talker, that is to say, the too daring talker, refused to bow to Gessler's hat. Of late years the prying student of history has been delighting himself beyond measure over a wonderful find which he has made, to wit, that Tell did not shoot the apple from his son's head. To hear the students jubilate, one would suppose that the question of whether Tell shot the apple or didn't was an important matter, whereas it ranks in importance exactly with the question of whether Washington chopped down the cherry tree or didn't. The deeds of Washington, the patriot, are the essential thing. The cherry tree incident is of no consequence. To prove that Tell did shoot the apple from his son's head would merely prove that he had better nerve than most men, and was as skillful with a bow as a million others who preceded and followed him, but not one whit more so. But Tell was more and better than a mere marksman, more and better than a mere cool head. He was a type. He stands for Swiss patriotism. In his person was represented a whole people. His spirit was their spirit, the spirit which would bow to none but God, the spirit which said this in words and confirmed it with deeds. There have always been tells in Switzerland, people who would not bow. There was a sufficiency of them at Reutley. There were plenty of them at Milton, plenty at Grandson. There are plenty today. And the first of them all, the very first, earliest banner-bearer of human freedom in this world, was not a man, but a woman, Stauffacher's wife. There she looms, dim and great, through the haze of the centuries, delivering into her husband's ear that gospel of revolt which was to bear fruit in the conspiracy of Reutley and the birth of the first free government the world had ever seen. Thursday, September 10th. From this Victoria Hotel one looks straight across a flat of trifling width to a lofty mountain barrier, which has a gateway in it shaped like an inverted pyramid. Beyond this gateway arises the vast bulk of the Jungfrau, a spotless mass of gleaming snow, into the sky. The gateway, in the dark-colored barrier, makes a strong frame for the great picture. The somber frame and the glowing snow-pile are startlingly contrasted. It is this frame which concentrates and emphasizes the glory of the Jungfrau and makes it the most engaging and beguiling and fascinating spectacle that exists on the earth. There are many mountains of snow that are as lofty as the Jungfrau and as nobly proportioned, but they lack the frame. They stand at large. They are intruded upon and elbowed by neighboring domes and summits, and their grandeur is diminished and fails of effect. It is a good name, Jungfrau, virgin. Nothing could be whiter, nothing could be purer, nothing could be saintlier of aspect. At 6 yesterday evening, the great intervening barrier seen through a faint bluish haze seemed made of air and substanceless, so soft and rich it was, so shimmering where the wandering lights touched it, and so dim where the shadows lay. Apparently it was a dream stuff, a work of the imagination, nothing real about it. The tint was green, slightly varying shades of it, but mainly very dark. The sun was down, as far as that barrier was concerned, but not for the Jungfrau, towering into the heavens beyond the gateway. She was a roaring conflagration of blinding white. It is said that Fridolin, the holy Fridolin, a new saint, but formerly a missionary, gave the mountain its gracious name. He was an Irishman, son of an Irish king. There were 30,000 kings reigning in County Cork alone in his time, 1,500 years ago. It got so that they could not make a living. There was so much competition, and wages got cut so. Some of them were out of work months at a time, with wife and little children to feed, and not a crust in the place. At last a particularly severe winter fell upon the country, and hundreds of them were reduced to mendicancy, and were to be seen day after day in the bitterest weather, standing barefoot in the snow, holding out their crowns for alms. Indeed, they would have been obliged to emigrate or starve, but for a fortunate idea of Prince Fridolin's, who started a labor union, the first one in history, and got the great bulk of them to join it. He thus won the general gratitude, and they wanted to make him emperor, emperor over them all, emperor of County Cork. But he said no, walking delegate was good enough for him. For behold, he was modest beyond his years, and keen as a whip. To this day in Germany and Switzerland, where St. Fridolin is deeply revered and honored,
The peasantry speak of him affectionately as the first walking delegate. The first walk he took was into France and Germany, missionarying, for missionarying was a better thing in those days than it is in ours. All you had to do was to cure the head savage's sick daughter by a miracle like the miracle of Lourdes in our day, for instance, and immediately that head savage was your convert. He was your convert and filled to the eyes with a new convert's enthusiasm. You could sit down and make yourself easy now. He would take the axe and convert the rest of the nation himself. Charlemagne was that kind of a walking delegate. Yes, there were great missionaries in those days, for the methods were sure and the rewards great. We have no such missionaries now, and no such methods. But to continue the history of the first walking delegate, if you are interested, I am interested myself, because I have seen his relics at Sackingen, and also the very spot where he worked his great miracle, the one which won him his sainthood in the papal court a few centuries later. To have seen these things makes me feel very near to him, almost like a member of the family, in fact. While wandering about the continent, he arrived at the spot on the Rhine which is now occupied by Sackingen, and proposed to settle there. But the people warned him off. He appealed to the king of the Franks, who made him a present of the whole region, people and all. He built a great cloister there for women, and proceeded to teach in it and accumulate more land. There were two wealthy brothers in the neighborhood, Urso and Landulf. Urso died, and Fridolin claimed his estates. Landulf asked for documents and papers. Fridolin had none to show. He said the bequest had been made to him by word of mouth. Landulf suggested that he produce a witness, and said it in a way which he thought was very witty, very sarcastic. This shows that he did not know the walking delegate. Fridolin was not disturbed. He said, "Appoint your court. I will bring a witness." The court thus created consisted of 15 counts and barons. A day was appointed for the trial of the case. On that day the judges took their seats in state, and proclamation was made that the court was ready for business. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes passed, and yet no Fridolin appeared. Landulf rose, and was in the act of claiming judgment by default, when a strange clacking sound was heard coming up the stairs. In another moment Fridolin entered at the door, and came walking in a deep hush down the middle aisle, with a tall skeleton stalking in his rear. Amazement and terror sat upon every countenance, for everybody suspected that the skeleton was Urso's. It stopped before the chief judge, and raised its bony arm aloft, and began to speak, while all the assembly shuddered, for they could see the words leak out between its ribs. It said, "Brother, why dost thou disturb my blessed rest, and withhold by robbery the gift which I gave thee for the honor of God?" It seems a strange thing, and most irregular, but the verdict was actually given against Landulf on the testimony of this wandering rack-heap of unidentified bones. In our day a skeleton would not be allowed to testify at all, for a skeleton has no moral responsibility, and its word could not be rationally trusted. Most skeletons are not to be believed on oath, and this was probably one of them. However, the incident is valuable as preserving to us a curious sample of the quaint laws of evidence of that remote time, a time so remote, so far back toward the beginning of original idiocy, that the difference between a bench of judges and a basket of vegetables was as yet so slight that we may say with all confidence that it didn't really exist. Sunday. During several afternoons I have been engaged in an interesting, maybe useful, piece of work, that is to say,
I have been trying to make the mighty Jungfrau earn her living, it in a most humble sphere, but on a prodigious scale, of necessity, for she couldn't do anything in a small way with her size and style. I have been trying to make her do service on a stupendous dial, and check off the hours as they glide along her pallid face up there against the sky, and tell the time of day to the populations lying within 50 miles of her, and to the people in the moon, if they have a good telescope there. Until late in the afternoon, the Jungfrau's aspect is that of a spotless desert of snow set upon edge against the sky. But by mid-afternoon some elevations which rise out of the western border of the desert, whose presence you perhaps had not detected or suspected up to that time, begin to cast black shadows eastward across the gleaming surface. At first there is only one shadow. Later there are two. Toward 4 p.m. the other day I was gazing and worshipping as usual, when I chanced to notice that shadow number 1 was beginning to take itself something of the shape of the human profile. By 4 the back of the head was good, the military cap was pretty good, the nose was bold and strong, the upper lip sharp, but not pretty, and there was a great goatee that shot straight aggressively forward from the chin. At 4:30 the nose had changed its shape considerably, and the altered slant of the sun had revealed and made conspicuous a huge buttress, or barrier of naked rock, which was so located as to answer very well for a shoulder or coat-collar to this swarthy and indiscreet sweetheart, who had stolen out there right before everybody, to pillow his head on the Virgin's white breast and whisper soft sentimentalities to her, to the sensuous music of crashing ice domes and the boom and thunder of the passing avalanche, music very familiar to his ear, for he has heard it every afternoon at this hour since the day he first came courting this child of the earth, who lives in the sky, and that day is far back, yes, for he was at this pleasant sport before the Middle Ages drifted by him in the valley, before the Romans marched past, and before the antique and recordless barbarians fished and hunted here, and wondered who he might be, and were probably afraid of him, and before primeval man himself, just emerged from his 4-footed estate, stepped out upon this plain, first sample of his race, 1,000 centuries ago, and cast a glad eye up there, judging he had found a brother human being and consequently something to kill. And before the big saurians wallowed here still some eons earlier. Oh, yes, a day so far back that the eternal sun was present to see that first visit, a day so far back that neither tradition nor history was born yet, and a whole weary eternity must come and go before the restless little creature, of whose face this stupendous shadow face was the prophecy, would arrive in the earth and begin his shabby career and think it a big one. Oh, indeed, yes, when you talk about your poor Roman and Egyptian day before yesterday antiquities, you should choose a time when the hoary shadow face of the Jungfrau is not by. It antedates all antiquities known or imaginable, for it was here the world itself created the theater of future antiquities, and it is the only witness with a human face that was there to see the marvel, and remains to us a memorial of it. By 4:40 p.m. the nose of the shadow is perfect and is beautiful. It is black and is powerfully marked against the upright canvas of glowing snow, and covers hundreds of acres of that resplendent surface. Meantime shadow number 2 has been creeping out well to the rear of the face west of it, and at 5 o'clock has assumed a shape that has rather a poor and rude semblance of a shoe. Meantime also the great shadow face has been gradually changing for 20 minutes, and now, 5 p.m., It is becoming a quite fair portrait of Roscoe Conkling. The likewise is there and is unmistakable. The goatee is shortened now and has an end. Formerly it hadn't any, but ran off eastward and arrived nowhere. By 6 p.m. the face has dissolved and gone, and the goatee has become what looks like the shadow of a tower with a pointed roof, and the shoe had turned into what the printers call a fist, with a finger pointing. If I were now imprisoned on a mountain summit 100 miles northward of this point, and was denied a timepiece, I could get along well enough from 4 till 6 on clear days, for I could keep trace of the time by the changing shapes of these mighty shadows on the Virgin's front, the most stupendous dial I am acquainted with, the oldest clock in the world by a couple of million years. I suppose I should not have noticed the forms of the shadows if I hadn't the habit of hunting for faces in the clouds and in mountain crags, a sort of amusement which is very entertaining even when you don't find any, and brilliantly satisfying when you do. I have searched through several bushels of photographs of the Jungfrau here, but found only one with the face in it, and in this case it was not strictly recognizable as a face, which was evidence that the picture was taken before 4 in the afternoon, and also evidence that all photographers have persistently overlooked one of the most fascinating features of the Jungfrau show. I say fascinating because if you once detect a human face produced on a great plan by unconscious nature, you never get tired of watching it. At first you can't make another person see it at all, but after he has made it out once, he can't see anything else afterward. The King of Greece is a man who goes around quietly enough when off duty. One day this summer he was traveling in an ordinary first-class compartment, just in his other suit, the one which he works the realm in when he is at home, and so he was not looking like anybody in particular, but a good deal like everybody in general. By and by a hearty and healthy German-American got in and opened up a frank and interesting and sympathetic conversation with him, and asked him a couple of thousand questions about himself, which the king answered good-naturedly, but in a more or less indefinite way as to private particulars. "Where do you live when you are at home?" "In Greece." "Greece? Well, now that is just astonishing. Born there?"
"Yes."
"Do you speak Greek?"
"Yes."
"Now, ain't that strange? I never expected to live to see that. What is your trade? I mean, how do you get your living? What is your line of business?"
"Well, I hardly know how to answer. I'm only a kind of foreman, on a salary, and the business, well, is a very general kind of business."
"Yes, I understand. General jobbing. A little of everything. Anything that there's money in."
"That's about it, yes."
"Are you traveling for the house now?"
"Well, partly, but not entirely. Of course I do a stroke of business if it falls in the way."
"Good. I like that in you. That's me every time. Go on."
"I was only going to say I am off on my vacation now."
"Well, that's all right. No harm in that. A man works all the better for a little let-up now and then. Not that I've been used to having it myself, for I haven't. I reckon this is my first. I was born in Germany, and when I was a couple of weeks old, shipped for America, and I've been there ever since, and that's 64 years by the watch. I'm an American in principle, and a German at heart, and it's the boss combination. Well, how do you get along, as a rule? Pretty fair?"
"I've rather a large family."
"There, that's it. Big family, and trying to raise them on a salary. Now, what did you go to do that for?"
"Well, I thought—"
"Of course you did. You were young and confident, and thought you could branch out and make things go with a whirl, and here you are, you see. But never mind about that. I'm not trying to discourage you. Dear me, I've been just where you are myself. You've got good grit. There's good stuff in you, I can see that. You got a wrong start. That's the whole trouble. But you hold your grip, and we'll see what can be done. Your case ain't half as bad as it might be. You are going to come out all right. I'm bail for that. Boys and girls? My family? Yes, some of them are boys, and the rest girls. It's just as I expected. But that's all right, and it's better so, anyway. What are the boys doing? Learning a trade? Well, no. I thought it's a great mistake. It's the biggest mistake you ever made. You see that in your own case. A man ought always to have a trade to fall back on. Now, I was a harness maker at first. Did that prevent me from becoming one of the biggest brewers in America? Oh, no. I always had the harness trick to fall back on in rough weather. Now, if you had learned how to make harness, however, it's too late now. Too late, and it's no good plan to cry over spilt milk. But as to the boys, you see, what's to become of them if anything happens to you? It has been my idea to let the eldest one succeed me. Oh, come. Suppose the firm don't want him? I hadn't thought of that, but now look here. You want to get right down to business and stop dreaming. You are capable of immense things, man. You can make a perfect success in life. All you want is somebody to steady you and boost you along on the right road. Do you own anything in the business? No, not exactly. But if I continue to give satisfaction, I suppose I can keep your place, yes. Well, don't you depend on anything of the kind. They'll bounce you the minute you get a little old and worked out. They'll do it sure. Can't you manage somehow to get into the firm? That's the great thing, you know. I think it is doubtful, very doubtful. That's bad. Yes, and unfair, too. Do you suppose that if I should go there and have a talk with your people? Look here, do you think you could run a brewery? I have never tried, but I think I could do it after I got a little familiarity with the business. The German was silent for some time. He did a good deal of thinking, and the king waited with curiosity to see what the result was going to be. Finally the German said, "My mind's made up. You leave that crowd. You'll never amount to anything there. In these old countries they never give a fellow a show. Yes, you come over to America. Come to my place in Rochester. Bring the family along. You shall have a show in the business and the foremanship besides. George, you said your name was George? I'll make a man of you. I give you my word. You've never had a chance here, but that's all going to change. By gracious, I'll give you a lift that'll make your hair curl." End of Mark Twain in the Cradle of Liberty. Read by John Greenman. Section 6 of Mark Twain's Travel Letters from 1891 to 1892. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Chicago of Europe by Mark Twain, which appeared in the Chicago Sunday Tribune April 3, 1892. Read by John Greenman with help from Eberhard Schneider. I feel lost in Berlin. It has no resemblance to the city I had supposed it was. There was once a Berlin which I would have known, from descriptions in books, the Berlin of the last century and the beginning of the present one, a dingy city in a marsh, with rough streets, muddy and lantern-lighted, dividing straight rows of ugly houses all alike, compacted into blocks as square and plain and uniform and monotonous and serious as so many dry-goods boxes. But that Berlin has disappeared. It seems to have disappeared totally and left no sign. The bulk of the Berlin of today has about it no suggestion of a former period. The site it stands on has traditions and a history, but the city itself has no traditions and no history. It is a new city, the newest I have ever seen. Chicago would seem venerable beside it, for there are many old-looking districts in Chicago, but not many in Berlin. The main mass of the city looks as if it had been built last week. The rest of it has a just perceptibly graver tone, and looks as if it might be 6 or even 8 months old. The next feature that strikes one is the spaciousness, the roominess of the city. There is no other city in any country whose streets are generally wide. Berlin is not merely a city of wide streets, it is the city of wide streets. As a wide street city, it has never had its equal in any age of the world. Unter den Linden is 3 streets in one. The Potsdamer Straße is bordered on both sides by sidewalks, which are themselves wider than some of the historic thoroughfares of the old European capitals. There seem to be no lanes or alleys. There are no shortcuts. Here and there, where several important streets empty into a common center, that center's circumference is of a magnitude calculated to bring that word spaciousness into your mind again. The park in the middle of the city is so huge that it calls up that expression once more. The next feature that strikes one is the straightness of the streets. The short ones haven't so much as a waver in them. The long ones stretch out to prodigious distances, and then tilt a little to the right or left, then stretch out on another immense reach as straight as a ray of light. A result of this arrangement is that at night Berlin is an inspiring sight to see. Gas and electric light are employed with a wasteful liberality, and so, wherever one goes, he has always double ranks of brilliant lights stretching far down into the night on every hand, with here and there a wide and splendid constellation of them spread out over an intervening Platz. And between the interminable double procession of street lamps one has the swarming and darting cab lamps, a lively and pretty addition to the fine spectacle, for they counterfeit the rush and confusion and sparkle of an invasion of fireflies. There is one other noticeable feature, the absolutely level surface of the site of Berlin. Berlin, to recapitulate, is newer to the eye than is any other city, and also blonder of complexion and tidier. No other city has such an air of roominess, freedom from crowding. No other city has so many straight streets, and with Chicago it contests the chromo for flatness of surface and for phenomenal swiftness of growth. Berlin is the European Chicago. The two cities have about the same population, say 1.5 million. I cannot speak in exact terms, because I only know what Chicago's population was week before last, but at that time it was about 1.5 million. 15 years ago, Berlin and Chicago were large cities, of course, but neither of them was the giant it now is. But now the parallels fail. Only parts of Chicago are stately and beautiful, whereas all of Berlin is stately and substantial, and it is not merely in parts, but uniformly beautiful. There are buildings in Chicago that are architecturally finer than any in Berlin, I think, but what I have just said above is still true. These two flat cities would lead the world for phenomenal good health if London were out of the way. As it is, London leads by a point or two. Berlin's death rate is only 19 in the 1,000. 14 years ago the rate was a third higher. Berlin is a surprise in a great many ways, in a multitude of ways, to speak strongly and be exact. It seems to be the most governed city in the world, but one must admit that it also seems to be the best governed. Method and system are observable on every hand, in great things, in little things, in all details of whatsoever size, and it is not method and system on paper, and they are an end. It is method and system in practice, and it has a rule for everything, and puts the rule in force, puts it in force against the poor and powerful alike, without favor or prejudice. It deals with great matters and minute particulars with equal faithfulness, and with a plodding and painstaking diligence and persistency which compel admiration and sometimes regret. There are several taxes, and they are collected quarterly. Collected is the word. They are not merely levied, they are collected every time. This makes light taxes. It is in cities and countries where a considerable part of the community shirk payment that taxes have to be lifted to a burdensome rate. Here the police keep coming calmly and patiently until you pay your tax. They charge you 5 or 10 cents per visit after the first call. By experiment you will find that they will presently collect that money. In one respect, the 1,500,000 of Berlin's population are like a family. The head of this large family knows the names of its several members, and where the said members are located, and when and where they were born, and what they do for a living, and what their religious brand is. Whoever comes to Berlin must furnish these particulars to the police immediately. Moreover, if he knows how long he is going to stay, he must say so. If he takes a house, he will be taxed on the rent and taxed also on his income. He will not be asked what his income is, and so he may save some lies for home consumption. The police will estimate his income from the house rent he pays, and tax him on that basis. Duties on imported articles are collected with inflexible fidelity, be the sum large or little, but the methods are gentle, prompt, and full of the spirit of accommodation. The postman attends to the whole matter for you, in cases where the article comes by mail, and you have no trouble and suffer no inconvenience. The other day a friend of mine was informed that there was a package in the post office for him, containing a lady's silk belt with gold clasp and a gold chain to hang a bunch of keys on. In his first agitation he was going to try to bribe the postman to chalk it through, but acted upon his sober second thought, and allowed the matter to take its proper and regular course. In a little while the postman brought the package, and made these several collections. Duty on the silk belt, 7½ cents. Duty on the gold chain, 10 cents. Charge for fetching the package, 5 cents. These devastating imposts are exacted for the protection of German home industries. The calm, quiet, courteous, cussed persistence of the police is the most admirable thing I have encountered on this side. They undertook to persuade me to send and get a passport for a Swiss maid whom we had brought with us, and at the end of 6 weeks of patient, tranquil, angelic daily effort they succeeded. I was not intending to give them trouble, but I was lazy, and I thought they would get tired. Meanwhile, they probably thought I would be the one. It turned out just so. One is not allowed to build unstable, unsafe, or unsightly houses in Berlin. The result is this calmly and conspicuously stately city, with its security from conflagrations and breakdowns. It is built of architectural Gibraltars. The building commissioners inspect while the building is going up. It has been found that this is far better than to wait till it falls down. These people are full of whims. One is not allowed to cram poor folk into cramped and dirty tenement houses. Each individual must have just so many cubic feet of room space, and sanitary inspections are systematic and frequent. Everything is orderly. The fire brigade march in rank, curiously uniformed, and so grave is their demeanor that they look like a Salvation Army under conviction of sin. People tell me that when a fire alarm is sounded,
The firemen assemble calmly, answer to their names when the roll is called, then proceed to the fire. There they are ranked up military fashion and told off in detachments by the chief, who parcels out to the detachments the several parts of the work which they are to undertake in putting out that fire. This is all done with low-voiced propriety, and strangers think these people are working a funeral. As a rule, the fire is confined to a single floor in these great masses of bricks and masonry, and consequently there is little or no interest attaching to a fire here for the rest of the occupants of the house. There is abundance of newspapers in Berlin, and there was also a newsboy, but he died. At intervals of half a mile on the thoroughfares there are booths, and it is at these that you buy your papers. There are plenty of theaters, but they do not advertise in a loud way. There are no big posters of any kind, and the display of vast type and of pictures of actors and performance framed on a big scale and done in rainbow colors is a thing unknown. If the big show bills existed, there would be no place to exhibit them, for there are no poster fences, and one would not be allowed to disfigure dead walls with them. Unsightly things are forbidden here. Berlin is a rest to the eye. And yet the saunterer can easily find out what is going on at the theaters. All over the city, at short distances apart, there are neat round pillars, 18 feet high and about as thick as a hogshead, and on these the little black and white theater bills and other notices are posted. One generally finds a group round each pillar reading these things. There are plenty of things in Berlin worth importing to America. It is these that I have particularly wished to make a note of. When Buffalo Bill was here, his biggest poster was probably not larger than the top of an ordinary trunk. There is a multiplicity of clean and comfortable horse cars, but whenever you think you know where a car is going to, you would better stop ashore, because that car is not going to that place at all. The car routes are marvelously intricate, and often the drivers get lost and are not heard of for years. The signs on the cars furnish no details as to the course of the journey. They name the end of it, and then experiment around to see how much territory they can cover before they get there. The conductor will collect your fare over again every few miles and give you a ticket which he hasn't apparently kept any record of, and you keep it till an inspector comes aboard by and tears a corner off it, which he does not keep. Then you throw the ticket away and get ready to buy another. Brains are of no value when you are trying to navigate Berlin in a horse car. When the ablest of Brooklyn's editors was here on a visit, he took a horse car in the early morning and wore it out trying to go to a point in the center of the city. He was on board all day and spent many dollars in fares, and then did not arrive at the place which he had started to go to. This is the most thorough way to see Berlin, but it is also the most expensive. But there are excellent features about the car system, nevertheless. The car will not stop for you to get on or off except at certain places a block or two apart, where there is a sign to indicate that that is a halting station. This system saves many bones. There are 20 places inside the car. When these seats are filled, no more can enter. 4 or 5 persons may stand on each platform. The law decrees the number. And when these standing places are all occupied, the next applicant is refused. As there is no crowding, and as no rowdyism is allowed, women stand on the platforms as well as the men. They often stand there when there are vacant seats inside, for these places are comfortable, there being little or no jolting. A native tells me that when the first car was put on, 30 or 40 years ago, the public had such a terror of it that they didn't feel safe inside of it or outside either. They made the company keep a man at every crossing with a red flag in his hand.
Nobody would travel in the car except convicts on the way to the gallows. This made business in only one direction, and the car had to go back light. To save the company, the city government transferred the convict cemetery to the other end of the line. This made traffic in both directions and kept the company from going under. This sounds like some of the information which traveling foreigners are furnished with in America. To my mind, it has a doubtful ring about it. The first-class cab is neat and trim, and has leather cushion seats and a swift horse. The second-class cab is an ugly and lubberly vehicle, and is always old. It seems a strange thing that they have never built any new ones. Still, if such a thing were done, everybody that had time to flock would flock to see it, and that would make a crowd, and the police do not like crowds and disorder here. If there were an earthquake in Berlin, the police would take charge of it, and conduct it in that sort of orderly way that would make you think it was a prayer meeting. That is what an earthquake generally ends in, but this one would be different from those others. It would be kind of soft and self-contained, like a Republican praying for a mugwump. For a course, a quarter of an hour or less, one pays 25 cents in a first-class cab and 15 cents in a second class. The first class will take you along faster, for the second-class horse is old, always old as his cab, some authorities say, and ill-fed and weak. He has been a first class once, but has been degraded to second class for long and faithful service. Still, he must take you as far for 15 cents as the other horse takes you for 25. If he can't do his 15-minute distance in 15 minutes, he must still do the distance for the 15 cents. Any stranger can check the distance off by means of the most curious map I am acquainted with. It is issued by the city government and can be bought in any shop for a trifle. In it, every street is sectioned off like a string of long beads of different colors. Each long bead represents a minute's travel, and when you have covered 15 of the beads, you have got your money's worth. This map of Berlin is a gay-colored maze, and looks like pictures of the circulation of the blood. The streets are very clean. They are kept so, not by prayer and talk and the other New York methods, but by daily and hourly work with scrapers and brooms. And when an asphalted street has been tidily scraped after a rain or a light snowfall, they scatter clean sand over it. This saves some of the horses from falling down. In fact, this is a city government which seems to stop at no expense where the public convenience, comfort, and health are concerned, except in one detail. That is the naming of the streets and the numbering of the houses. Sometimes the name of a street will change in the middle of a block. You will not find it out till you get to the next corner and discover the new name on the wall, and of course you don't know just when the change happened. The names are plainly marked on the corners, on all the corners. There are no exceptions. But the numbering of the houses, there has never been anything like it since original chaos. It is not possible that it was done by this wise city government. At first one thinks it was done by an idiot, but there is too much variety about it for that. An idiot could not think of so many different ways of making confusion and propagating blasphemy. The numbers run up one side of the street and down the other. That is endurable, but the rest isn't. They often use one number for 3 or 4 houses, and sometimes they put the number on only one of the houses and let you guess at the others. Sometimes they put a number on a house, 4 for instance, then put 4A, 4B, 4C on the succeeding houses, and one becomes old and decrepit before he finally arrives at 5. A result of this systemless system is that when you are at number 1 in a street, you haven't any idea how far it may be to number 150. It may be only 6 or 8 blocks.
It may be a couple of miles. Frederick Street is long, and is one of the great thoroughfares. The other day a man put his money behind the assertion that there were more refreshment places in that street than numbers on the houses, and he won. There were 254 numbers and 257 refreshment places. Yet, as I have said, it is a long street. But the worst feature of all this complex business is that in Berlin the numbers do not travel in any one direction. No, they travel along until they get to 50 or 60 perhaps. Then suddenly you find yourself up in the hundreds, 140 maybe. The next will be 139. Then you perceive by that sign that the numbers are now traveling toward you from the opposite direction. They will keep that sort of insanity up as long as you travel that street. Every now and then the numbers will turn and run the other way. As a rule, there is an arrow under the number to show by the direction of its flight which way the numbers are proceeding. There are a good many suicides in Berlin. I have seen 6 reported in one day. There is always a deal of learned and laborious arguing and ciphering going on as to the cause of this state of things. If they will set to work and number their houses in a rational way, perhaps they will find out what was the matter. More than a month ago, Berlin began to prepare to celebrate Professor Virchow's 70th birthday. When the birthday arrived, the middle of October, it seemed to me that all the world of science arrived with it. Deputation after deputation came, bringing the homage and reverence of far cities and centers of learning, and during the whole of a long day the hero of it sat and received such witness of his greatness as has seldom been vouchsafed to any man in any walk of life in any time, ancient or modern. These demonstrations were continued in one form or another, day after day, and were presently merged in similar demonstrations to his twin in science and achievement, Professor Helmholtz, whose 70th birthday is separated from Virchow's by only about 3 weeks. So nearly as this did these two extraordinary men come to being born together. Two such births have seldom signalized a single year in human history. But perhaps the final and closing demonstration was peculiarly grateful to them. This was a Comers, given in their honor the other night by 1,000 students. It was held in a huge hall, very long and very lofty, which had 5 galleries far above everybody's head, which were crowded with ladies, 400 or 500 I judged. It was beautifully decorated with clustered flags and various ornamental devices, and was brilliantly lighted. On the spacious floor of this place were ranged in files innumerable tables, seating 24 persons each, extending from one end of the great hall clear to the other, and with narrow aisles between the files. In the center, on one side, was a high and tastefully decorated platform 20 or 30 feet long, with a long table on it, behind which sat the half-dozen chiefs of the choir of the Comers, in the rich medieval costumes of as many different college corps. Behind these youths a band of musicians was concealed. On the floor directly in front of this platform were half a dozen tables which were distinguished from the outlying continent of tables by being covered instead of left naked. Of these, the central table was reserved for the 2 heroes of the occasion, and 20 particularly eminent professors of the Berlin University, and the other covered tables were for the occupancy of 100 less distinguished professors. I was glad to be honored with a place at the table of the 2 heroes of the occasion, although I was not really learned enough to deserve it. Indeed, there was a pleasant strangeness in being in such company. To be thus associated with 23 men who forget more every day than I ever knew. Yet there was nothing embarrassing about it, because loaded men and empty ones look about alike. I knew that to that multitude there I was a professor. It required but little art to catch the ways and attitude of those men and imitate them, and I had no difficulty in looking as much like a professor as anybody there. We arrived early, so early that only Professors Virchow and Helmholtz and a dozen guests of the special tables were ahead of us, and 300 or 400 students. But people were arriving in floods now, and within 15 minutes all but the special tables were occupied, and the great house was crammed, the aisles included. It was said that there were 4,000 men present. It was a most animated scene, there is no doubt about that. It was a stupendous beehive. At each end of each table stood a corps student in the uniform of his corps. These quaint costumes are of brilliant colored silks and velvets, with sometimes a high-plumed hat, sometimes a broad Scotch cap, with a great plume wound about it sometimes, oftenest a little shallow silk cap on the tip of the crown, like an inverted saucer, and sometimes the pantaloons are snow white, sometimes of other colors. The boots in all cases come up well above the knee, and in all cases also white gauntlets are worn. The sword is a rapier with a bowl-shaped guard for the hand, painted in several colors. Each corps has a uniform of its own, and all are of rich material, brilliant in color, and exceedingly picturesque. For they are survivals of the vanished costumes of the Middle Ages, and they reproduce for us the time when men were beautiful to look at. The student who stood guard at our end of the table was of grave countenance, and great frame and grace of form, and he was doubtless an accurate reproduction, clothes and all, of some ancestor of his of 2 or 3 centuries ago. A reproduction as far as the outside, the animal man goes, I mean. As I say, the place was now crowded. The nearest aisle was packed with students standing up, and they made a fence which shut off the rest of the house from view. As far down this fence as you could see, all these wholesome young faces were turned in one direction. All these intent and worshipping eyes were centered upon one spot, the place where Virchow and Helmholtz sat. The boys seemed lost to everything, unconscious of their own existence. They devoured these 2 intellectual giants with their eyes. They feasted upon them, and the worship that was in their hearts shone in their faces. It seemed to me that I would rather be flooded with a glory like that, instinct with sincerity, innocent of self-seeking, than win 100 battles and break 1,000,000 hearts. There was a big mug of beer in front of each of us, and more to come when wanted. There was also a quarto pamphlet containing the words of the songs to be sung. After the names of the officers of the feast were these words in large type:
Während des Kommerzes herrscht allgemeiner Burgfriede.
I was not able to translate this to my satisfaction, but a professor helped me out. This was his explanation. The students in uniform belong to different college corps. Not all students belong to corps. None join the corps except those who enjoy fighting. The corps students fight duels with swords every week, one corps challenging another corps to furnish a certain number of duelists for the occasion, and it is only on this battlefield that students of different corps exchange courtesies. In common life they do not drink with each other or speak. The above line now translates itself: there is truce during the commerce, war is laid aside, and fellowship takes its place. Now the performance began. The concealed band played a piece of martial music. Then there was a pause. The students on the platform rose to their feet. The middle one gave a toast to the Emperor. Then all the house rose, mugs in hand. At the call 1, 2, 3, all glasses were drained and then brought down with a slam on the tables in unison. The result was as good an imitation of thunder as I have ever heard. From now on, during an hour, there was singing in mighty chorus. During each interval between songs, a number of the special guests, the professors, arrived.
There seemed to be some signal whereby the students on the platform were made aware that a professor had arrived at the remote door of entrance, for you would see them suddenly rise to their feet, strike an erect military attitude, then draw their swords. The swords of all their brethren standing guard at the innumerable tables would flash from their scabbards and be held aloft, a handsome spectacle. 3 clear bugle notes would ring out, then all these swords would come down with a crash twice repeated on the tables and be uplifted and held aloft again. Then in the distance you would see the gay uniforms and uplifted swords of a guard of honor clearing the way and conducting the guest down to his place. The songs were stirring, the immense outpour from young life and young lungs, the crash of swords, and the thunder of the beer mugs gradually worked a body up to what seemed the last possible summit of excitement. It surely seemed to me that I had reached that summit, that I had reached my limit, and that there was no higher lift desirable for me. When apparently the last eminent guest had long ago taken his place, again those 3 bugle blasts rang out, and once more the swords leapt from their scabbards. Who might this late comer be? Nobody was interested to inquire. Still, indolent eyes were turned toward the distant entrance. We saw the silken gleam and the lifted swords of a guard of honor plowing through the remote crowds. Then we saw that end of the house rising to its feet, saw it rise abreast the advancing guard all along, like a wave. This supreme honor had been offered to no one before. Then there was an excited whisper at our table, "Munson," and the whole house rose and shouted and stamped and clapped and banged the beer mugs. Just simply a storm. Then the little man with his long hair and Emersonian face edged his way past us and took his seat. I could have touched him with my hand. Mommsen. Think of it. This was one of those immense surprises that can happen only a few times in one's life. I was not dreaming of him. He was to me only a giant myth, a world-shadowing specter, not a reality. The surprise of it all can be only comparable to a man suddenly coming upon Mont Blanc, with its awful form towering into the sky, when he didn't suspect he was in its neighborhood. I would have walked a great many miles to get a sight of him, and here he was, without trouble or tramp or cost of any kind. Here he was, clothed in a titanic deceptive modesty, which made him look like other men. Here he was, carrying the Roman world and all the Caesars in his hospitable skull, and doing it as easily as that other luminous vault, the skull of the universe, carries the Milky Way and the constellations. One of the professors said that once upon a time an American young lady was introduced to Mommsen and found herself badly scared and speechless. She dreaded to see his mouth unclose, for she was expecting him to choose a subject several miles above her comprehension, and didn't suppose he could get down to the world that other people lived in. But when his remark came, her terrors disappeared. "Well, how do you do? Have you read Howell's last book? I think it's his best." The active ceremonies of the evening closed with the speeches of welcome delivered by 2 students, and the replies made by Professors Virchow and Helmholtz. Virchow has long been a member of the city government in Berlin. He works as hard for the city as does any other Berlin alderman, and gets the same pay, nothing. I don't know that we in America could venture to ask our most illustrious citizen to serve in a board of aldermen, and if we might venture it, I am not positively sure that we could elect him. But here the municipal system is such that the best men in the city consider it an honor to serve gratis as aldermen, and the people have the good sense to prefer these men and to elect them year after year. As a result, Berlin is a thoroughly well-governed city. It is a free city. Its affairs are not meddled with by the state. They are managed by its own citizens, and after methods of their own devising. End of The Chicago of Europe by Mark Twain, and end of Mark Twain's travel letters from 1891 to 1892, read by John Greenman with help from Eberhard Schneider.